The champagne glass shattered first. Then came the screaming. Security guards descended on the night janitor like wolves on wounded prey, their hands rough on his threadbare jacket, as the entire ballroom fell into horrified silence. But Ethan Quill wasn't looking at them. He was watching the 11-year-old girl in the wheelchair, watching her fingers white-knuckled and trembling against the armrest, doing something they hadn't done in 18 months. Something impossible. And when CEO Charlotte Voss saw it too, when her perfectly composed mask finally cracked, that's when everything changed. This is that story. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this reaches. The Voss Foundation Annual Gala wasn't a place for people like Ethan Quill. He knew it the moment he pushed his cleaning cart through the service entrance at 9:47 p.m., exactly 13 minutes before his night shift officially started. The grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel swelled with the kind of wealth that made his daughter Nova's birthday wish, a used bicycle, seem like a different universe entirely. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured rainbows across marble floors. Women in gowns that cost more than his monthly rent glided past men in tuxedos sharp enough to cut glass. The air itself smelled expensive, imported lilies, aged whiskey, and something else Ethan had almost forgotten existed possibility. Cart stays in the service corridor until 11 Hurro Quill. Marcus, the head of evening facilities, jabbed a finger at him without looking up from his clipboard. Voss biotech people are touchy about the help being visible during events. You know the drill. Ethan nodded, parking the cart beside a tower of folded linens that smelled like industrial bleach and broken dreams. He did know the drill. 5 years of knowing it, 5 years of being invisible, of keeping his head down and his past buried deep where it couldn't hurt anyone else. Where it couldn't remind him of white hospital corridors and the sound of machines that breathed for people who couldn't breathe for themselves anymore. He pulled on latex gloves that were 2 sizes too small and made his way to the periphery of the ballroom, staying in the shadows, like a ghost, like he'd learned to do. The fundraiser was in full swing. A string quartet played something classical and melancholy in the corner. Donors clustered around high-top tables, their laughter bright and performative writing checks that would save lives they'd never have to think about again after tonight. And there at the center table sat Charlotte Voss. Even from 30 feet away, even partially obscured by a marble column, Ethan could feel the gravity she exerted. The CEO of Voss Biotech carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from too many battles won and not enough sleep. Her black gown was elegant but understated, no jewelry except a simple watch that probably cost more than his car. Auburn hair pulled back in a style that said, "I don't have time for vanity, but I'll respect the occasion." Early 40s maybe, with the kind of sharp, intelligent eyes that could dissect a quarterly report or a person's soul with equal precision. But it wasn't Charlotte who made Ethan's breath catch. It was the girl beside her. Ivy Voss sat in a custom wheelchair positioned at the table's end, separated just slightly from the other guests, not quite part of the celebration, not quite excluded from it. She wore a lavender dress that someone had chosen carefully. Probably her mother, and her blonde hair fell in waves that had been curled with patience and love. She was beautiful in the way that 11-year-old girls on the cusp of adolescence often are, all potential and unknowing grace. She was also completely still. Not the stillness of boredom or distraction, the stillness of absence. Her eyes tracked nothing. Her hands lay limp in her lap. When Charlotte leaned over to adjust the blanket across her daughter's knees, speaking words Ethan couldn't hear. Ivy's expression didn't change. Not even a flicker. Functional neurological disorder. The diagnosis hit Ethan like a freight train he'd been trying to outrun for half a decade. He'd seen it before, seen it intimately, professionally, in the years when he'd worn a different uniform and a different name. Before the accident. Before Anna. Before he'd learned that all the medical knowledge in the world meant nothing when you couldn't save the one person who mattered most. He forced himself to look away, to focus on his actual job. He had trash bins to empty, spills to mop, a life to maintain that didn't involve ghosts or memories or 11-year-old girls trapped in bodies that had forgotten how to move. But something was wrong. Ethan's hand stilled on the edge of a table he'd been clearing. He watched Ivy from the corner of his eye, the way he'd been trained to watch patients years ago, not staring directly, but observing, cataloging, noting the micro-movements that most people missed. There. Again. When a waiter passed too close to her wheelchair carrying a tray of champagne flutes, Ivy's left index finger twitched. Just once. Barely a millimeter. So slight that even Charlotte, sitting right beside her daughter, didn't notice. But Ethan noticed. His pulse kicked up. He moved closer, pretending to straighten chairs at the next table, watching. The string quartet shifted to a new piece, something in a minor key, something with weight. And Ivy's jaw tensed. Not a lot. Just enough that the muscle jumped beneath skin that hadn't seen sunlight in too long. He shouldn't get involved. He had no right to get involved. He was a janitor now, not a neurological rehab specialist, not Dr. Ethan Quill, who'd published 3 papers on FND recovery protocols before his world ended at 2:34 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday, when Anna's car had met black ice and an oak tree going 60 miles an hour. But God help him, he couldn't stop watching. The evening wore on. Charlotte gave a speech, polished, professional, hitting all the right notes about innovation and hope and the future of biotech. People applauded. Checks were written. The wealthy felt good about themselves for another year. And through it all, Ivy sat like a statue carved from silence and stillness. Except for those micro-movements, the ones no one else saw, the tiny rebellions of a nervous system that wanted desperately to reconnect if only someone would show it the way. Quill. Marcus materialized at his elbow like an angry spirit. "The hell are you doing standing around? We've got overflow in the West restroom, and you're staring at the guests like some kind of creep." "Sorry." Ethan grabbed his cart, started moving. "Just heading there now." But he kept watching, kept cataloging. When Charlotte stood to greet a board member, Ivy was left alone for 30 seconds, 45, a full minute. Her mother's hand had been resting on her shoulder, a point of contact, of grounding. Without it, Ivy's breathing changed. Shallower. Faster. A fine tremor started in her right hand. Anxiety response. Ethan's clinical brain supplied automatically. Fight or flight activation without the ability to do either. The system knows it should react, but can't remember how. He was halfway to the restroom when the music changed again. The string quartet launched into something lighter now, a waltz flowing and elegant. Around the ballroom, couples began to gravitate toward the small dance floor that had been cleared near the orchestra. A silver-haired man led his wife into a gentle turn. A younger couple laughed as they attempted the steps, clearly unpracticed but happy. And something in Ethan's chest cracked open. He thought of Nova, his 9-year-old daughter, currently asleep 3 buses and a world away in their 1-bedroom apartment. He thought of how she'd looked at the girls at her school last month, watching them play jump rope during recess, wanting so badly to join them, but held back by the threadbare clothes and the free lunch stigma, and the way poverty made you invisible, even when you were standing right there. He thought of Anna, who used to dance with him in their kitchen at midnight, when they were both too exhausted to sleep, her residency schedule brutal, but her smile unbreakable. He thought of Ivy Voss, 11 years old, trapped not by a wheelchair, but by a nervous system that had forgotten the map home. And he made a decision that would change everything. Ethan set down his mop, pulled off his latex gloves, walked across the ballroom floor with his heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape. The conversations died first. A ripple of silence spreading outward from his path like blood in water. He was acutely aware of everything wrong with this picture, his janitor's uniform still damp from mopping his shoes, scuffed and cheap the way he didn't belong here in any possible version of reality. Charlotte was talking to someone important, a man with perfect teeth and a Rolex. She didn't see Ethan approaching. Didn't see him stop in front of her daughter's wheelchair. But Ivy saw him. For the first time that evening, her eyes focused. really focused. On him. Hi, he said softly just to Ivy, like they were the only two people in the world. My name is Ethan. I know this is going to sound strange and you don't have to answer, but I was wondering. He extended his hand palm up, an offering, not a demand. Would you like to dance? The silence that followed was the kind that could shatter worlds. What the hell do you think you're doing? Charlotte's voice cut through the moment like a scalpel through flesh. She was beside him in an instant, positioning herself between Ethan and her daughter with the fierce protectiveness of a mother who'd spent too long watching her child disappear into stillness. Ma'am, Security. Charlotte's eyes were blazing, her professional composure stripped away to reveal something raw and furious underneath. Someone get security right now. Ethan stayed crouched, stayed calm. He could feel the entire ballroom staring at him, now could feel the weight of their judgment and horror. The poor janitor harassing the disabled daughter of a CEO. The optics were spectacularly bad. But he kept his eyes on Ivy. And Ivy's fingers, the ones resting on her wheelchair's armrest, were white-knuckled, gripping, moving. I'm not here to hurt anyone, Ethan said quietly, still addressing Ivy, not Charlotte. I just thought you might want to. You thought? Charlotte's voice cracked with something that might have been rage, or might have been pain, or might have been the accumulated grief of 18 months watching her daughter fade away. You're the goddamn janitor, and you thought you had the right to approach my daughter. Two security guards appeared, both built like linebackers, both moving with practiced efficiency. Rough hands grabbed Ethan's shoulders, started pulling him upright. Sir, you need to come with us. Wait. Ethan's eyes never left Ivy. Just look at her hands. Get him out of here. Charlotte was shaking now, her carefully maintained control crumbling. I want him fired. I want him arrested. But then she stopped. Because she looked. She looked at her daughter's hands, at the fingers that had been limp and lifeless for 18 months. At the white knuckles gripping the armrest, like Ivy was holding on for dear life. At the fine tremor running through those small hands. At the way Ivy's chest was rising and falling rapidly. Her breathing changed her body, responding, reacting, doing something, anything, other than the terrible stillness that had become their new normal. Charlotte's face went pale. Ivy. The girl's lips parted. No sound came out. But the movement was there. The intention was there, firing synapses that had been dark for too long. Get your hands off me, Ethan said to the security guards, his voice calm but commanding, carrying the authority of someone who'd spent years in emergency situations. Give her a minute, just 1 minute. Like hell, one of the guards started. Stop. Charlotte's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried absolute authority. She was staring at her daughter like she'd seen a ghost. Everyone stop. The ballroom was silent, except for the string quartet, who'd continued playing, because no one had told them to stop their waltz. Now an absurdly cheerful soundtrack to a moment balanced on the edge of a knife. Charlotte dropped to her knees beside the wheelchair, her expensive gown pooling on the marble floor, forgotten. Baby. Can you hear me, Ivy? Ivy's eyes were locked on Ethan's, and slowly, so slowly, it was almost imperceptible, her head moved. Not a nod. Not yet. But a shift, a turning, a response. And then her body started shaking. Not the micro tremors from before. This was bigger, a full-body tremor that looked like seizure activity but wasn't. Ethan recognized it immediately. A neurological storm, the nervous system trying to reboot, to reconnect pathways that had been severed not by physical injury, but by psychological trauma. Oh God, she's having a seizure, someone shouted. She's not. Ethan pulled free from the security guards and knelt beside Charlotte, his professional training overriding everything else. Mrs. Voss, listen to me carefully. This isn't a seizure. Her nervous system is trying to reconnect. Don't touch her. Don't try to stop it. Just let it happen. Who the fuck are you? Charlotte demanded, but her voice was breaking, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter's body move. really move for the first time in forever. Someone who knows what this is. Ethan kept his voice level, grounding. Ivy, you're safe. I know this feels scary, but you're safe. Your body is remembering how to work. Just breathe with me. Okay, in through your nose, out through your mouth. He demonstrated, exaggerating the breathing pattern, making it visible. And impossibly miraculously, Ivy's ragged breathing started to match his rhythm. In, out, in, out. The tremors began to subside gradually, like a storm passing. When it was over, when Ivy sagged back into her wheelchair, exhausted but more present than she'd been in months, Charlotte was sobbing openly, her hand pressed to her mouth, her entire body shaking with something that might have been hope, or might have been terror, or might have been both. "Security," she said finally, her voice hoarse. "Take him to my office. Don't let him leave the building. I want to know everything, who he is, why he did this, everything." The guards grabbed Ethan again, gentler this time, but no less insistent. "And call Dr. Morrison." Charlotte continued, still on her knees beside her daughter, smoothing back Ivy's hair with trembling fingers. "Tell him we need him here immediately. Tell him." Her voice broke. "Tell him there's been a change." As they led Ethan away, he glanced back one last time. Ivy was watching him go, her eyes clearer than they'd been all evening, and her right hand lifted just barely, just an inch off the armrest, in what might have been a wave, or might have been goodbye. The guards took him to a small office off the main lobby, told him not to move, and stationed themselves outside the door like he was a flight risk. Ethan sat in an uncomfortable chair and waited, his heart rate finally returning to normal, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life or committed the first honest act in 5 years. 27 minutes later, the door opened. Charlotte Voss stood in the doorway, and she looked like she'd aged a decade in the past half hour. Her makeup was ruined, mascara tracked down her cheeks. Her gown had a dirt smudge on the hem where she'd knelt on the floor. But her eyes were sharp and focused and absolutely uncompromising. "The gala is over," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "Ivy is with the hotel doctor. She's stable. Charlotte swallowed hard. She moved her hand. By herself. She asked for water. First words she's spoken in 6 months. Ethan felt something uncoil in his chest that he hadn't realized was wound tight. "That's good. That's really good. Who are you?" Charlotte stepped into the office and closed the door behind her. "And don't tell me you're just a janitor, because janitors don't know neurological protocols, and janitors don't trigger FND breakthroughs in the middle of charity galas." There it was, the moment Ethan had been avoiding for 5 years. "My name is Ethan Quill," he said slowly. "I used to be a neurological rehabilitation specialist at St. Margaret's Hospital. I specialized in functional neurological disorders, conversion disorders, dissociative movement problems, psychological paralysis. His throat tightened. "I was good at it, before I left." "Why did you leave?" "Because I couldn't save my wife." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and final. Charlotte studied him for a long moment. "What happened to her?" "Car accident, 5 years ago. Anna was a resident at County General coming home from a 36-hour shift. Black ice on Highway 9. She didn't die right away." Ethan's voice was flat, reciting facts like a medical report, because that was the only way he could get through it. "She was unconscious for 4 days. I stayed with her, used every technique I knew, every protocol, every experimental therapy. Nothing worked. On the 5th day, we let her go." "I'm sorry," Charlotte said, and she sounded like she meant it. "After that, I couldn't go back. Couldn't look at another patient, couldn't." He shook his head. "I had Nova to think about. She was 4 years old and she'd just lost her mother. So I found work that didn't require thinking. Janitorial services. Night shift, so I can be there when Nova wakes up, put her on the school bus, pick her up in the afternoon. It's not much, but it's steady, and it keeps us alive. And tonight..." Charlotte's voice was sharp again, Why did you do that to my daughter? Because I saw her reacting. Ethan met her eyes directly. Micro movements in response to stimuli. Her nervous system is trying to come back online, Mrs. Voss. It's just trapped behind whatever trauma caused the conversion in the first place. The accident, I'm assuming. Charlotte flinched. 18 months ago, car accident on the way home from her piano lesson. She was in the front seat. Her voice cracked. I was supposed to pick her up, but I had a board meeting that ran late. My ex-husband Gavin picked her up instead. And something happened. The car went off the road. Ivy wasn't physically injured, not a scratch on her. But when she woke up in the hospital, she couldn't move, Ethan finished. Couldn't move, couldn't talk, just stared at nothing like she'd left her body behind. Charlotte wrapped her arms around herself. We've tried everything. Neurologists, psychologists, experimental therapies. Nothing's worked. She just keeps fading further away. What happened tonight wasn't an accident, Ethan said carefully. It was a pattern interrupt. FND is the brain's way of protecting itself from trauma. It shuts down motor function as a form of dissociation. But the pathways are still there, still intact. You just need to disrupt the pattern that's keeping her stuck. By asking her to dance in front of 300 people, Charlotte's voice rose. By humiliating her. By treating her like a person instead of a patient. Ethan leaned forward, willing her to understand. Everyone in that ballroom was looking at Ivy like she was broken. Poor thing. Such a tragedy. But I didn't look at her that way. I looked at her like she was a girl who might want to dance. No pity, no expectations, just an invitation to be human again. Charlotte's breath caught. That's why she responded. That's why she responded. The shock of it broke through her protective pattern just enough to let her nervous system remember what it's supposed to do. Ethan hesitated. She's going to need more than one intervention, Mrs. Voss. And she's going to need it from someone who understands the condition. But what happened tonight? That was the first step. You can build on that. Charlotte was quiet for a long time, staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Finally, she said, "You're fired." Ethan nodded slowly. He'd expected this. "I understand." "You're fired," Charlotte continued, "because as of tomorrow morning, Voss Biotech Security is going to flag you as permanently banned from all our properties. There will be a formal complaint filed. Your employment will be terminated for cause." "I understand," Ethan repeated, feeling the weight of it settle on his shoulders. It would make finding another job harder, but he'd do it for Nova. He'd always do it for Nova. "Where do you live?" Charlotte asked. The question threw him. "What?" "Your address. Where do you live?" "North Side, the Hamilton Apartments, Building C Unit 214. The words came out automatically, even as his mind raced trying to figure out her angle. Charlotte pulled out her phone, typed something rapidly. "Tomorrow morning you'll have a visitor. Don't be alarmed, and don't leave town." Then she was gone, the door closing behind her with a soft click. Ethan sat alone in the office for another 10 minutes before the guards came back to escort him out through the service entrance, past his abandoned cleaning cart, into the cold night air that smelled like rain and exhaust fumes, and the particular loneliness of 200 a.m. He caught 3 buses home, watched the city slide past through dirty windows, and tried not to think about Ivy's eyes when she'd focused on him. Tried not to think about the way Charlotte had looked when her daughter moved. Tried not to think about Anna, about the years of careful non-thinking he'd built up like scar tissue over an open wound. Nova was asleep when he got home, curled up in her twin bed, with Mr. Whiskers, the threadbare stuffed cat they'd had since she was 2. Ethan stood in the doorway of their shared bedroom and watched his daughter breathe peaceful and innocent, and his entire reason for getting up every morning. "I might have just ruined everything," he whispered to the darkness. "But I couldn't let her disappear. Not when I knew I could help." Mr. Whiskers didn't respond, which was probably for the best. Ethan lay down on his own mattress, really just a futon they'd found on the curb 3 years ago, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come. It rarely did anymore. At 7:43 a.m., someone knocked on his door. Ethan opened it to find Charlotte Voss standing in his hallway, looking completely out of place in her designer pantsuit and heels, her expression unreadable. "Can I come in?" she asked. He stepped aside wordlessly. Charlotte walked into the small apartment, taking in the peeling wallpaper, the kitchenette with its ancient appliances, the general shabbiness of a life lived paycheck to paycheck. Nova was eating cereal at their small table, her eyes going wide at the unexpected visitor. "Hi," Nova said, because she had better manners than her father despite everything. "I'm Nova. Are you here about the rent? Dad said we'd have it by Friday." "I'm not here about the rent," Charlotte said gently. Then to Ethan, "Can we talk privately?" Ethan glanced at Nova, who was watching with frank curiosity. "Sweetheart, can you brush your teeth? School bus in 20 minutes. "But—" "Now please." Nova sighed dramatically, but obeyed, disappearing into the bathroom and closing the door. Charlotte turned to face him fully. "Ivy hasn't stopped moving since last night. Nothing major, just small things. Reaching for her water glass. Shifting in her wheelchair. Dr. Morrison says it's remarkable. Impossible. He wants to know what happened." "And you didn't tell him about me," Ethan guessed. "I told him we had a moment of crisis that triggered a breakthrough, which is technically true." Charlotte's jaw tightened. "I came here because I need to know something. Can you help my daughter?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. "I'm not a doctor anymore," Ethan said quietly. "That's not what I asked." Charlotte's eyes were fierce. "Can you help my daughter, yes or no?" Ethan thought about Ivy's white-knuckled grip on the armrest, about the way her body had remembered movement when given the right trigger, about 18 months of living in a cage built from trauma and well-meaning medical interventions that treated symptoms instead of causes. "Maybe," he said finally, "if she's willing, if you can accept that it won't look like conventional therapy, and if you understand that I can't make any promises." Charlotte nodded slowly. "What would you need?" "Space. Privacy. Time with Ivy without medical professionals hovering. And—" Ethan hesitated. "You need to be prepared for this to get worse before it gets better. Trauma healing isn't linear. She might regress. She might have panic attacks. She might hate me." "She moved," Charlotte said simply. "For the first time in 18 months, my daughter moved because of you. So tell me what you need, and I'll make it happen." "Why?" Ethan asked. "Why risk your reputation, your company's credibility, everything on a disgraced specialist working as a janitor?" Charlotte's eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. "Because last night, for 30 seconds, I saw my daughter come back, and I would burn everything I've built to the ground if it meant I could keep seeing that light in her eyes." In the bathroom, water ran as Nova brushed her teeth. Outside, the city woke up to another day of noise and traffic, and a million small tragedies no one would notice. And in that shabby apartment, standing in the early morning light, Ethan Quill made a choice. "Okay," he said. "I'll help her." Charlotte's breath shuddered out in relief. "Thank you. I'll arrange, on one condition." Ethan held up a hand. "I need you to understand something. This isn't about fixing Ivy. It's not about making her normal again or checking boxes on a recovery plan. It's about creating a safe space for her nervous system to remember how to function. That means no cameras, no documentation for medical journals, no turning this into a PR opportunity for Voss Biotech." "Agreed," Charlotte said immediately. "And Nova comes with me." Ethan gestured toward the bathroom. "Wherever we're doing this, my daughter is part of it. Non-negotiable." Charlotte didn't hesitate. "Done. Then we have a deal." They shook hands, the CEO and the janitor, the mother and the widower, two people who'd lost everything and were willing to risk what little remained on a chance at healing. Neither of them knew that in 72 hours, Charlotte's ex-husband would file an emergency petition for full custody. Neither of them knew that the gala incident had been recorded on 3 different phones, and was already making its way through social media with damning captions. Neither of them knew that the real reason behind Ivy's accident, the terrible secret that had trapped her in silence, was about to surface in ways that would destroy reputations, end careers, and potentially send someone to prison. All they knew was that a little girl had moved her hand. And sometimes, that was enough to start a revolution. The guest house sat at the far edge of the Voss estate, half hidden behind a stand of old oak trees that filtered the afternoon sunlight into something soft and golden. It was small by mansion standards, just 2 bedrooms, a living area, and a kitchenette. But to Ethan, walking through the front door with Nova's hand clutched tight in his, and their few belongings stuffed into garbage bags, it felt like stepping onto a stage where everything could go catastrophically wrong. "This is where we're staying." Nova's voice was hushed with awe as she took in the leather furniture, the gas fireplace, the windows that actually closed all the way without gaps that let in winter wind. "Dad, there's a dishwasher." "Don't get too comfortable," Ethan murmured, though his own chest felt tight, seeing his daughter's face light up at things that should have been normal, should have been baseline human comfort. "This is temporary, just until we help Ivy." "The girl from last night." Nova set down Mr. Whiskers on the cream-colored sofa with careful reverence, like the stuffed cat might contaminate something. "Is she nice?" Ethan knelt down to meet his daughter's eyes. Those same dark eyes Anna had given her, full of questions and trust he didn't deserve. "She's been through something really hard, sweetheart. She might not talk to you. She might not even look at you. And that's okay. We're here to help her feel safe, not to make her perform. Understand?" Nova nodded solemnly, and Ethan felt that familiar twist of pride and guilt that came from raising a child who'd learned empathy too young, who knew about loss and disappointment in ways 9-year-olds shouldn't have to know. The main house loomed in the distance, all glass and modern angles, completely at odds with the cottagecore aesthetic of the guest house. Charlotte had explained the separation that morning in clipped businesslike terms. Privacy for everyone, distance from household staff who might gossip, a controlled environment where Ivy's progress wouldn't become fodder for tabloids or medical journals. But Ethan heard what she didn't say this way if things went wrong, if he turned out to be a fraud, or worse, they could erase him quietly without contaminating the main residence. Fair enough. He'd want the same protection if Nova were the one trapped in silence. They unpacked in silence, Nova carefully hanging her 3 school outfits in the closet, like they were designer gowns, Ethan trying not to calculate how many months' rent this place would cost, and failing. When Charlotte had said she'd arrange something, he'd assumed she meant permission to work with Ivy during supervised sessions. He hadn't expected to be essentially moved onto the property like some kind of live-in specialist, hadn't expected the quiet luxury of a space that didn't smell like mildew and disappointment. The knock came at 4:17 p.m., 3 sharp raps that made Ethan's pulse spike before he could control it. Charlotte stood on the small porch, and behind her in a custom electric wheelchair sat Ivy. The girl looked different in daylight, younger, somehow more vulnerable. She wore soft clothes, yoga pants, and an oversized sweater, and her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. But it was her eyes that caught Ethan, the same eyes from last night that had focused on him with desperate clarity. Today they were shuttered again, distant, tracking nothing. "May we come in?" Charlotte's voice was carefully neutral, professional, like they were business associates and not 2 people gambling everything on a long shot. Ethan stepped aside. The wheelchair's motor hummed softly as Charlotte guided Ivy through the doorway. Nova appeared from the bedroom, her face lighting up with curiosity before she remembered herself and went quiet. "Ivy, this is Ethan and his daughter Nova," Charlotte said, her voice taking on that particular bright false tone parents use when trying to make things seem normal when nothing is normal. "They're going to be staying in the guest house for a while. He's going to help you." Ivy's expression didn't change, but her left hand resting on the wheelchair's armrest trembled so slightly, Ethan almost missed it. Charlotte saw him notice, and her jaw tightened. "She had a difficult night. Dr. Morrison wanted to increase her sedatives, but Her voice cracked just for a second. I told him no. I told him we're trying something different. Good, Ethan said quietly. Sedatives would just push her further down. We need her nervous system awake, not suppressed. So what now? Charlotte looked lost suddenly. This powerful CEO reduced to just a mother who didn't know how to help her child. What's the protocol? Should I leave? Should I stay? Do you need medical equipment? I can have anything here within the hour. Charlotte? Ethan kept his voice gentle but firm. I need you to trust me, and I need you to leave. Today is just about being in this space. No interventions, no therapy, just existence. But, Mom. The word was barely a whisper, barely a breath, but it came from Ivy. Her first word since they'd arrived. Her eyes hadn't moved, her expression hadn't changed, but she'd spoken. Charlotte's hand flew to her mouth. Baby, I'm right here. Go, Ivy whispered, and this time there was something behind the word, something that might have been pleading, or might have been command. Please go. The pain on Charlotte's face was visceral, but she nodded, swallowing hard. Okay, I'll be in the main house if you need me. If anything happens, we'll call, Ethan promised. Charlotte left, and the silence that filled the space behind her was dense and complicated. Ivy sat in her wheelchair near the window, still as a photograph, while Nova perched on the edge of the sofa, and Ethan stood awkwardly in the middle of the living room, wondering what the hell he was supposed to do now. Minutes passed. 5, 10, 15. Nova pulled out a worn paperback from her backpack and started reading, her legs swinging, occasionally glancing at Ivy with undisguised curiosity. Ethan made coffee he didn't want just to have something to do with his hands. Ivy stared at nothing. This was the hard part. The waiting. The not doing. Every instinct from his years in medical practice screamed at him to assess, to intervene, to fix something. But FND didn't respond to fixing. It responded to safety. And safety took time. At the 30-minute mark, Nova set down her book and walked over to where she'd left Mr. Whiskers on the sofa. She picked up the threadbare cat, looked at it for a long moment, then walked over to Ivy's wheelchair with the kind of casual fearlessness only children possess. Hi, Nova said, stopping a respectful distance away. I'm Nova. That's kind of a weird name, I know. It means new star or something. Dad says Mom picked it. She held up the stuffed cat. This is Mr. Whiskers. He's really old and one of his eyes is missing, but he's still good at listening. Do you want to hold him? Ivy's eyes flickered, just for a second, toward Nova, toward the cat, then away again. But it was something. Nova didn't push. She just carefully placed Mr. Whiskers on the arm of Ivy's wheelchair within reach if the girl wanted to take him, and wandered back to the sofa like nothing significant had happened. Ethan felt his throat tighten. His daughter teaching him a lesson in how to help without helping, how to offer without demanding. Another 20 minutes passed. The light shifted through the windows, turning orange and amber as evening approached. Ethan moved to the kitchenette and started making dinner pasta simple, the kind of comfort food that didn't require thought. Nova did her homework at the dining table, pencil scratching against paper. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. Boring sounds. And then so quietly, Ethan almost missed it over the sound of boiling water. Ivy's fingers moved. Not a tremor this time. Intentional movement. Her right hand lifted from the armrest, shaking badly, and touched Mr. Whiskers' matted fur. Ethan kept chopping vegetables like nothing was happening. Nova didn't look up from her math problems. But they both felt it, that shift in the room's energy, that first crack in the wall. Ivy's fingers curled around the stuffed cat and pulled him into her lap. By the time dinner was ready, the cat was clutched against her chest like a lifeline. The days that followed established a rhythm. Ethan and Nova would wake up in the guest house. Nova would get ready for school. Charlotte had arranged for a private car service that still made Nova's eyes go wide every morning, and Ethan would make breakfast. Ivy would arrive around 9, wheeled over by a nurse who'd been instructed to leave immediately. And then they'd just exist together. No therapy, no exercises, just life. Ethan would read the newspaper. Nova, on days she was home, would build elaborate Lego structures on the coffee table. Ivy would sit in her wheelchair, Mr. Whiskers in her lap, and slowly, incrementally, impossibly, she'd start to come back. On day 3, Ivy's eyes tracked Nova across the room when she went to get a snack. On day 5, Ivy's fingers drummed against her wheelchair armrest when Nova hummed while coloring. On day 7, Nova left a small plastic dinosaur, a T-Rex, with a missing tail, balanced on Ivy's lap tray. "His name is Reginald," Nova announced. "He's a Rex, but he's vegetarian because he's scared of blood. Isn't that funny?" Ivy's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Day 9 was when everything changed. Nova had left Reginald the T-Rex on Ivy's lap again, but this time she'd positioned him so his remaining leg was propped on Ivy's thigh outside the blanket. "He wants to be your friend," Nova said seriously. "But he's shy, so you have to let him know it's okay." Ethan was washing dishes deliberately, not watching when he heard the soft gasp. He turned. Nova was frozen, staring at Ivy with wide eyes. Ivy's hand was moving, actually moving with purpose, reaching down toward her own leg. Her fingers brushed against the plastic dinosaur. And then, with agonizing slowness, she picked it up. "Good job, Reginald." Ivy whispered, her voice rusty from disused tears streaming down her face. "You're brave." Nova burst into tears. Ethan had to turn away, pressing his palms against the sink edge, his own eyes burning. Because Ivy wasn't just moving. She was emotionally present, connected. The dissociation that had kept her trapped was starting to fracture. But that afternoon, when Charlotte came by for her daily check-in, Ethan saw the shadow cross Ivy's face before Charlotte even spoke. "Ivy, sweetheart, Gavin is here. He wants to see you." The reaction was instantaneous. Ivy's entire body went rigid. Her breathing became shallow, rapid. The hand that had picked up a plastic dinosaur just hours ago went limp. Mr. Whiskers fell from her lap to the floor. "No." The word came out strangled. "No, no, no. Ivy, it's okay. It's just your father." She said no. Ethan's voice cut through the room like a blade. He moved between Charlotte and Ivy, instinctively positioning himself as a barrier. "Charlotte, look at her." Charlotte did look, and the color drained from her face. Ivy was shaking. Her eyes rolled back slightly, her chest heaving in the gasping pattern of a panic attack or something worse. "This is exactly what happened in the hospital," Charlotte breathed. "Every time Gavin visited, every single time. The doctor said it was just agitation, that she didn't understand what was happening. She understands perfectly." Ethan crouched beside Ivy's wheelchair, not touching, just present. "Ivy, you're safe. He's not in this room. You're in the guest house. Can you hear Nova breathing? Match your breath to hers." Nova, bless her, immediately started exaggerating her breathing, making it loud and visible. In, out, in, out. Gradually, slowly, Ivy's panic subsided. But she wouldn't look at Charlotte, wouldn't look at anything. Charlotte's hands were shaking when she left, and Ethan could see her through the window, standing on the path between the guest house and the main residence, having a heated conversation on her phone. He couldn't hear the words, but he could read the body language: anger, frustration, fear. That evening, after Nova was asleep and Ivy had been wheeled back to the main house, Ethan stepped outside for air and found Charlotte sitting on the guest house porch steps, her professional composure completely shattered. "He's filing for emergency custody," she said without preamble. "Gavin. He's claiming that my judgment is compromised, that I'm allowing an unlicensed practitioner to experiment on our daughter, that Ivy is being harmed by unorthodox and dangerous interventions." Ethan felt ice water flood his veins. "Charlotte, he has a lawyer. A good one. Jeffrey Krause, the guy who handles celebrity custody battles. Charlotte laughed, but it sounded like breaking glass. And he has an expert witness, Dr. Raymond Finch. The name hit Ethan like a physical blow. Finch, Ray Finch from Columbia. You know him. We were colleagues, years ago before. Ethan's mind raced. He's brilliant, respected. If he's testifying against what we're doing here, he already has. Charlotte pulled out her phone, pulled up an email, handed it to him. This came through my lawyer 2 hours ago. Preliminary affidavit. Ethan read, his stomach sinking with each line. Dr. Finch's statement was clinical damning and impossible to refute without revealing his own credentials. Credentials he'd abandoned, credentials that came with baggage about Anna's death, about why he'd left medicine, about all the ways he'd failed when it mattered most. The affidavit concluded, allowing a custodial employee with no medical license or psychological training to conduct behavioral interventions with a vulnerable minor constitutes medical malpractice and psychological abuse. The child's recent responses are more likely stress reactions to inappropriate stimulation than genuine neurological recovery. Immediate cessation of this harmful protocol is essential for the child's well-being. Jesus, Ethan breathed. He's not wrong technically. I'm not licensed. What we're doing isn't protocol. If this goes before a judge... We have 72 hours, Charlotte interrupted. That's when the emergency hearing is scheduled. Gavin's demanding immediate supervised visitation and is petitioning to have Ivy removed from my primary custody until I demonstrate appropriate judgment regarding her medical care. 72 hours. 3 days to prove that what they were doing was working, was safe, was worth the risk. Can you get me a meeting with Finch? Ethan asked. Professional to professional. Maybe if I explain what we're actually doing. He won't meet with you. Charlotte's voice was flat. I already tried. His office said he's consulting for Gavin's legal team, and any communication has to go through Krause. Then we need evidence, documentation, something that shows Ivy's progress is real and sustainable. We have nothing. Charlotte stood, paced, her heels clicking on the wooden porch. We have a plastic dinosaur and a stuffed cat. We have your observations, which you can't testify to without revealing you're an unlicensed former specialist, which makes everything worse. We have my word as a mother, which Gavin's lawyers will paint as desperate denial. We have... She stopped. We have nothing that will hold up in court. The silence stretched between them, heavy with impossible choices. There's something else, Charlotte said finally. Something I haven't told you. About the accident. Ethan waited. Ivy wasn't the only one in the car. Gavin was driving. And when the police arrived, when the ambulance came, Ivy was conscious. She was conscious and she was screaming. Not in pain, she wasn't hurt, but screaming like she'd seen something. Charlotte's voice dropped to barely a whisper. She kept saying, the papers, over and over. The EMTs thought she was confused, in shock. But I always wondered. Wondered what? If she saw something. If Gavin... Charlotte cut herself off. I don't have proof. I don't even have a coherent theory. But my daughter went silent after that accident, and my ex-husband got very, very insistent about controlling the narrative. About having me declared an unfit mother who's too emotionally compromised to make decisions for Ivy. Before Ethan could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. He opened it, and the words punched him in the gut. You couldn't save your wife. What makes you think you can save someone else's daughter? Stop playing doctor before you destroy another family. His hands went numb. The phone nearly slipped from his grip. What is it? Charlotte asked, but Ethan couldn't answer, couldn't breathe. Couldn't think past the white noise of panic and old wounds ripped open. Anna. The hospital. The machines. The moment he'd had to make the choice to let her go. The years since telling himself it was mercy, telling himself he'd done everything possible, telling himself the guilt would fade. It never faded. Ethan. Charlotte's hand on his arm brought him back. What happened? He showed her the message. Watched her face harden into something cold and dangerous. "Gavin," she said simply. "He's trying to rattle you, make you quit before the hearing." "It's working." Ethan admitted, his voice barely functional. "Charlotte, maybe he's right. Maybe I'm being reckless. Maybe I am playing doctor when I have no right. Ivy picked up a dinosaur today." Charlotte's voice was fierce. "My daughter, who hasn't moved with intention in 18 months, picked up a plastic dinosaur and spoke to it. That's not playing doctor, that's giving her back her life. But if I cost you custody, then we fight to get it back." Charlotte's eyes blazed. "But we don't quit. We don't let Gavin win. And we don't let some anonymous text message make you doubt what you know is true." Ethan wanted to believe her. Wanted to believe that the progress they'd seen was real, that the risk was worth it, that he wasn't just recreating the pattern of his greatest failure with different people. But 72 hours suddenly felt like no time at all. The next morning, Ivy didn't come to the guest house. Charlotte sent a terse message. Gavin demanded supervised visitation. Judge granted it. 10 a.m. at the main house. "I have to allow it." Ethan and Nova waited in terrible silence. Nova tried to read, gave up, tried to build. With Legos gave up, finally just sat with Mr. Whiskers clutched to her chest, staring at the door like she could will Ivy to come through it. At 11:47, they heard shouting from the main house. Charlotte's voice raised in anger. A man's voice, smooth and reasonable, the kind of voice that won arguments by staying calm while everyone else lost control. Then running footsteps. The guest house door burst open. Charlotte stood there breathing hard, her hair disheveled, mascara smudged. He brought photographers. Gavin brought photographers to the visitation. He staged the whole thing, him being the devoted father, Ivy unresponsive, me being hysterical about the janitor in the guest house who's experimenting on her. Is Ivy? She shut down completely the moment she saw him. Completely non-verbal, non-responsive, back to how she was before. Charlotte's voice broke. 18 months of hell, and we got 1 week of progress, and he destroyed it in an hour. Ethan felt something dark and furious rise in his chest. Where is she now? Her room. The nurse is with her. Charlotte sank onto the sofa, put her head in her hands. The photos are already online. Social media is calling me a monster. A desperate CEO exploiting her disabled daughter, putting her in the hands of an unqualified charlatan. Voss Biotech's stock dropped 3% this morning. Nova, who'd been silent through all of this, suddenly spoke up. Why does Ivy's dad want to hurt her? The question hung in the air, simple and devastating. Charlotte looked at Nova with something like wonder. That's exactly what I need to figure out, sweetie. That's exactly what I need to know. She stood, her professional composure snapping back into place like armor. I'm pulling every resource I have. Financial investigators, private security, data forensics. If Gavin has something to hide, I'm going to find it. But I need you. She looked at Ethan. I need you to keep working with Ivy. Whatever time we have left. Can you do that? Ethan thought about the text message. About Anna. About all the ways he'd failed. Then he thought about Ivy's whispered, "You're brave," to a plastic dinosaur. Yes, he said. Yes, I can do that. But that night, after Nova was asleep and the guest house was silent except for the tick of the kitchen clock counting down the hours until the hearing, Ethan stood at the window and wondered if courage was just another word for reckless hope. And if reckless hope was enough to save a little girl from whatever darkness her father had wrapped around her like chains. In the main house, Ivy lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, her fingers curled around Mr. Whiskers, waiting for morning, and not knowing if the man who'd helped her remember how to move would still be there when the sun came up. The answer came at 2:34 a.m., the exact time Anna had died 5 years ago, when Ethan couldn't sleep and found himself staring at the ceiling, counting his failures like other people counted sheep. Music. He sat bolt upright in the darkness, his heart hammering. The accident had happened on the way home from Ivy's piano lesson. Charlotte had mentioned it in passing, but Ethan's exhausted brain had filed it away as irrelevant detail. Now, with 48 hours until the custody hearing, and Ivy regressed back into complete shutdown after seeing Gavin, it blazed in his mind like a flare. Piano lesson. Music. Auditory triggers linked to traumatic memory. He grabbed his phone, typed out a message to Charlotte despite the ungodly hour. What was Ivy listening to in the car, the day of the accident? The response came back in under a minute. Charlotte clearly wasn't sleeping either. I don't know. Gavin picked her up. Why her music playlist? From her phone, her tablet, whatever she had with her. I need to know what she was listening to before the crash. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Her tablet was in the car. Police gave it back weeks later in an evidence bag. I never looked at it. Too painful. It's in my office. Can you get it? Now, Ethan, it's 2:30 in the morning. We have 48 hours, Charlotte. I think the music might be the key. The dots pulsed for a long time. Then, give me 10 minutes. Ethan pulled on jeans and a sweatshirt, moved quietly through the dark guest house so he wouldn't wake Nova. He stood on the porch in the cold pre-dawn air, watching the main house, watching a light flicker on in what must be Charlotte's office. 7 minutes later, she emerged, walking quickly across the lawn in yoga pants and an oversized MIT sweatshirt that made her look younger, more vulnerable, more human than the CEO armor usually allowed. She held a tablet in a cracked pink case covered in unicorn stickers. The screen still works, Charlotte said as she climbed the porch steps, her voice rough with exhaustion and something that might have been hope or might have been dread. The police said there was no evidence on it, just games and music and... Her voice caught. Pictures of her and her friends from before, when she could still smile. Ethan took the tablet carefully like it might shatter. I need you to trust me with something that's going to sound insane. Everything about this situation already sounds insane. Fair point. Ethan powered on the tablet. The lock screen was a photo of Ivy at maybe 9 years old, grinning gap-toothed at the camera holding a blue ribbon from some kind of competition. So much life in that smile. So much possibility. Trauma memory isn't stored the same way as regular memory. It gets locked in the amygdala, the limbic system encoded with specific sensory markers. Sounds, smells, physical sensations. If I can find what Ivy was hearing right before the accident, right before her brain decided to shut down motor function as a protective response, you can use it to unlock the memory, Charlotte finished. Her eyes were bright, desperate. Can you really do that? I don't know, Ethan admitted. But it's the only thing I haven't tried. They went inside. Charlotte curled up on the sofa while Ethan navigated through the tablet's interface looking for music apps. He found Spotify, first opened the listening history. The last played song was time-stamped 4:47 p.m. on the day of the accident, exactly 12 minutes before the 911 call came in about a car off the road on Millbrook Highway. Claire de Lune, Ethan read. Debussy, piano piece. Charlotte went very still. That was her favorite. She'd been learning it for her spring recital. She played it constantly, drove me insane with the repetition. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. I'd give anything to hear her play it again. Ethan pulled up YouTube, found a professional recording, let the first notes shimmer through the quiet guest house. The melody was beautiful, haunting, deceptively simple, but full of emotional complexity. He watched Charlotte's face crumple as the music played, watched her press her palm against her mouth to hold back the sob. But he also watched something else. Through the guest house window, he could see the main house, could see a light flicker on in what Charlotte had told him was Ivy's bedroom. She's awake, Ethan said softly. Charlotte looked up, followed his gaze, saw the light. She never sleeps through the night anymore. Nightmares, the doctors think, but she can't tell us what she dreams about. Ethan made a decision. I need to try something. Right now. With the music. But Charlotte, if this goes wrong, if this pushes her deeper into trauma instead of bringing her out... Do it, Charlotte interrupted. Whatever it is, do it. We're out of time and options, and I'd rather try and fail than watch my daughter disappear completely." They crossed the dark lawn together, the piano music playing from Ethan's phone absurdly loud in the pre-dawn silence. The main house was all glass and shadows, expensive and cold, and nothing like a home where a child should feel safe. Charlotte's hands shook as she unlocked the side door that led directly to Ivy's wing. The nurse stationed outside Ivy's room jerked awake in her chair, startled. "Mrs. Voss, is everything—" "Take a break," Charlotte said, her voice allowing no argument. 30 minutes. Go get coffee." The nurse looked uncertain but nodded, gathering her things. As she passed Ethan, she gave him a look that was equal parts suspicious and pitying. Another person who thought he was a charlatan. Another person who might be right. Ivy's room was exactly what Ethan expected, and nothing like what he'd hoped. It was a hospital room disguised as a bedroom, everything arranged for accessibility for medical intervention for a patient instead of a child. Adaptive equipment dominated the space. The bed had rails. The walls were a neutral beige that felt like giving up. And in that bed, propped up against pillows, sat Ivy. Her eyes open and empty, staring at nothing. Ivy. Charlotte moved to her daughter's side, smoothed back hair that was tangled from restless sleep. "Sweetheart, Ethan's here. We want to try something. Is that okay?" No response. Not even a flicker. Ethan pulled a chair close to the bed, sat down so he was at Ivy's eye level. He pulled out the tablet, opened the music app again. "Ivy, I'm going to play the song you were listening to in the car. The day of the accident. If it's too much, if you need me to stop, just close your eyes and I'll stop immediately." "Okay." Nothing. He hit play. The piano notes filled the room, and Ivy's entire body went rigid. Her breathing accelerated. Her hands, which had been limp on the blanket, suddenly clenched into fists. Charlotte gasped, reached for her daughter, but Ethan held up a hand, stopping her. "Stay with it, Ivy," he said quietly, his voice steady despite his racing pulse. "Your body remembers. That's okay. You're safe here. The memory can't hurt you." Ivy's jaw trembled. A fine sheen of sweat broke out on her forehead. The music swelled, that gorgeous melody that Debussy had written to sound like moonlight, and Ivy's eyes, her eyes, finally moved. They tracked frantically around the room, like she was seeing something that wasn't there. Like she was back in that car 18 months ago. "Talk me through it," Ethan said, his voice a lifeline in the dark. "Not out loud if you can't, but if you could show me what you see, what you remember, can you do that?" Charlotte's hand found his shoulder, gripping tight. "Ethan, she's shaking. It's the nervous system trying to discharge the trauma," Ethan explained, never taking his eyes off Ivy. "She needs to move through it, not suppress it." He pulled a sketch pad and charcoal from his bag, supplies he'd brought from the guest house on instinct. He placed them on Ivy's lap. "Show me, Ivy. Draw what you see. You don't have to be good at it. Just let your hand move." For a long moment, nothing. The music played on that haunting melody, cycling through variations, and Ivy stared at the blank paper like it was a vast, impossible distance. Then, with a shaking hand that barely seemed under her control, she picked up the charcoal. The first mark was violent, a slash across the page that tore the paper slightly. Charlotte made a small sound of distress, but Ethan squeezed her hand, held her steady. Ivy's hand moved again, erratic, uncontrolled drawing lines that didn't make sense, until suddenly they did. A steering wheel. Broken. Bent at an unnatural angle. "Good," Ethan breathed. "That's good, Ivy. What else?" Another slash of charcoal. Lines radiating from a central point. It took Ethan a moment to recognize it, a windshield cracked in a spiderweb pattern, but not from impact with a tree or a pole. The crack pattern was wrong, centered in the upper right quadrant, like something had hit it from inside the car. Ivy's breathing was ragged now, tears streaming down her face, but her hand kept moving, drawing faster, more certain. Charlotte was crying silently, her grip on Ethan's shoulder so tight it hurt, but neither of them moved. Neither of them dared break the spell. The next image made Ethan's blood run cold. A hand. Just a hand, drawn from Ivy's perspective, from the passenger seat, looking left and slightly back. A hand reaching through the window. Not Ivy's hand. An adult's hand with something on the wrist. A watch. And something else. Ivy drew it carefully, precisely, her muscle memory taking over. A cufflink. Distinctive. Shaped like something Ethan couldn't quite make it out, but Charlotte could. "Oh my God," Charlotte whispered. "That's Gavin's. Those are his father's cufflinks. He wears them to important meetings, says they're good luck." But Ivy wasn't done. Her hand moved to a new section of paper. Drew the glove compartment open. Drew papers spilling out. Drew that hand, Gavin's hand, reaching for them, grabbing them, and in the foreground, barely visible, drawn with shaking, uncertain lines, the edge of a phone screen. Someone filming. Someone recording from outside the car. The music reached its climax, those soaring notes that sounded like falling upward, and Ivy's hand stilled. She looked at what she'd drawn, really looked at it, and a sound came from her throat that was half sob, half the kind of rage that comes from being silenced too long. "You left us," she whispered, her voice cracking, rusty, furious. "You took the papers and you left us." Charlotte dropped to her knees beside the bed, pulling Ivy into her arms, both of them shaking. "Baby, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't understand." But Ethan was staring at the drawing, his mind racing through the implications. The accident wasn't an accident. Or maybe it was. But what came after Gavin taking documents from the glove compartment while his daughter watched, while someone filmed, while the car sat damaged on the side of the road, that was premeditated? That was calculated. That was the moment Ivy's brain had decided the world was too dangerous to participate in anymore. "What papers?" Ethan asked quietly. "Charlotte, what would Gavin need to take from your car?" Charlotte looked up, her face streaked with tears, her eyes suddenly sharp with understanding. "I use that car for work sometimes. I kept backup files in the glove compartment, contracts, financial documents, things I'd review on long drives." Her voice went flat. "Including documents about the merger. The Voss-Kepler merger that fell through 6 months before the accident." Why would Gavin care about merger documents? Because he was on the board at Kepler before we divorced. Charlotte stood, her whole body vibrating with fury. Because he had insider knowledge. Because if he had access to our financial projections and deal terms before the merger was publicly announced. He could have traded on that information, Ethan finished. Insider trading. That's what this is about. That's why he needs custody. If Ivy testifies about what she saw, she can't testify if she's nonverbal and under his control. Charlotte said, her voice like ice. "She can't tell anyone what happened if he convinces a judge that I'm an unfit mother who's let a charlatan make his daughter worse. He's not fighting for custody because he loves her. He's fighting for custody to keep her silent." The room went quiet except for Ivy's ragged breathing and the final notes of Claire de Lune fading into silence. Ethan's phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. "Stop digging, or everyone gets buried." He showed it to Charlotte. Her jaw set. "Too late," she said. "I'm already digging, and I'm taking him down." But even as she said it, even as the truth started to crystallize into something they could use, Ethan felt the weight of what they didn't have. They had a traumatized child's drawing. They had a theory. They had suspicions and reconstructed memories, and nothing that would hold up in court against a respected businessman with an expert witness and a sympathetic narrative. "We need the video," Ethan said. "Someone was filming. If that footage exists." "It's been 18 months, Charlotte countered. "Even if someone recorded it, why would they keep it? Why wouldn't they have come forward?" "Because they were working for Gavin," Ivy said. Both adults turned to stare at her. The girl's eyes were clearer now, present in a way they hadn't been since Ethan first saw her at the gala. She looked exhausted and traumatized, and absolutely certain. There was a man. Ivy continued, her voice getting stronger with each word. After the crash. Before the ambulance came, he had a camera, like a real camera, not a phone. He was filming through the passenger window. And Dad... She choked on the word. Gavin looked at him and nodded. Like they planned it. Like they were supposed to meet there. Jesus Christ. Charlotte breathed. He staged it. He caused the accident on purpose. I don't think so, Ivy interrupted. I think the accident was real. The tire blew, we swerved, hit the guardrail. But everything after him, taking the papers, him having someone there to film it, him leaving me alone in the car for almost 15 minutes while he went to get help, that was planned. He knew exactly what he needed to do. Ethan's mind was spinning. The police report. Charlotte, did you ever see the actual police report from the accident? Of course. It said mechanical failure, tire blowout, no negligence. Gavin was very helpful with the investigation, very cooperative. She stopped. Too cooperative. Who was the responding officer? Charlotte pulled out her phone, scrolled through old emails with shaking hands. Sergeant Marcus Cole, Highway Patrol. He was very sympathetic. Told me these things happen, that I was lucky Ivy wasn't physically hurt. He recommended a therapist for her, gave me his personal number in case I had questions. I thought he was just being kind. Or he was making sure you didn't ask the wrong questions, Ethan said grimly. Ivy, the man with the camera. Can you remember anything else about him? What he looked like? What he was wearing? Ivy closed her eyes, concentrating. Tall, beard. He had a vest like the ones photographers wear. And his camera had a logo on the strap, 3 letters. I remember, because they were the same letters as my initials backward. She opened her eyes. IVY, but backward, YVI. Charlotte's fingers flew across her phone screen. YVI Media. It's a boutique agency that does corporate video PR coverage, event documentation. She went pale. They're based here, in the city, and their client list includes... She turned the phone so Ethan could see. There on the screen, Thorne Financial Group, Gavin Thorne Principal. They had him. Or at least they had a thread to pull that might unravel everything. But it was 4:18 a.m. They had less than 44 hours until the custody hearing, and they needed evidence that would stand up in court, not just theories from a traumatized child's recovered memories. I need to make some calls, Charlotte said, already moving toward the door. I have a forensic accountant who owes me a favor. If there are records of Gavin's trades from that period, if we can prove insider knowledge. And I need to talk to someone about the police report, Ethan added. If Sergeant Cole buried evidence or lost footage from traffic cameras. No. Ivy's voice stopped them both. You need to let me finish. She picked up the charcoal again, turned to a fresh page in the sketchpad. Her hand was steadier now, more certain. She drew quickly with purpose. A phone screen larger this time, more detailed. And on that screen, visible in her drawing, a clock showing 4:47 p.m., the exact time the music had been playing. He was filming before the crash, Ivy said quietly. The camera guy. He was already there on the side of the road when our tire blew. Like he was waiting. Like he knew exactly where and when it would happen. The implications hit Ethan like a freight train. Someone tampered with your tire. This wasn't an accident at all. This was attempted murder. Ivy's voice was calm, matter of fact, the calmness of someone who'd had 18 months to think about this in the prison of her own mind. Maybe. Or maybe just insurance. Make it look like a random accident. Make sure there's documentation showing Dad was the victim too, the devoted father who tried to save his daughter, and then take the papers that prove he'd been stealing from Mom's company. She looked at Charlotte with eyes far too old for 11. He was going to let me die if the accident was bad enough. I could see it in his face. He stood outside the car and he looked at me and he calculated whether it was better for me to live or die. And he decided I was more useful alive as long as I couldn't talk. The silence that followed was the kind that changes everything. Charlotte's face had gone from grief to rage to something cold and calculating. "We're going to bury him," she said quietly. "We're going to take everything he is and everything he has, and we're going to bury him so deep he never sees daylight again." "But first we need proof," Ethan said. "Real, tangible, court-admissible proof. Drawing and testimony from a child who's been nonverbal for 18 months, any decent lawyer will tear that apart. We need the video, the financial records, the traffic camera footage, if it still exists. We need—" His phone rang. At 4:23 in the morning, it rang with a number he recognized from another lifetime. His old colleague from St. Margaret's, Dr. Sarah Chen, who'd covered his patients when he left, who'd quietly kept track of him over the years, through mutual friends who'd understood better than anyone why he couldn't practice anymore. "Sarah," Ethan answered, confused. "Why are you—" "I just got a call from Dr. Raymond Finch," Sarah said without preamble. "He wanted information about you, about your time at St. Margaret's, about Anna, about why you left medicine." Her voice hardened. "I told him to go to hell. But Ethan, he's building a case against you. He's got records of Anna's death, your resignation, everything. He's going to paint you as an unbalanced former doctor who abandoned medicine after killing his wife through negligence." "I didn't—" Ethan's throat closed. "Sarah, I didn't kill her. The accident. I know that. Everyone who was there knows that. But Finch is going to twist it, and when he's done, you're going to look like the last person who should be anywhere near a vulnerable child." She paused. "Unless you fight back, unless you show them what you're actually doing is working." "I can't testify," Ethan said. "The moment I admit I'm treating Ivy with neurological rehab techniques, I'm admitting to practicing medicine without a license. I'll be arrested." "Then we need to find another way to prove Finch is wrong," Sarah said. "Give me a few hours. I'll see what I can dig up." She hung up. Ethan stood there in Ivy's hospital bedroom, holding a phone that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, looking at a child who'd just told him her father had calculated her worth and found it acceptable only as long as she stayed silent. Charlotte was already on her own phone, voice low and fierce, talking to someone about financial forensics and subpoenas and emergency injunctions. Ivy sat in her bed surrounded by drawings that told a story of betrayal and trauma and systematic silencing, her hands still stained with charcoal. "Mr. Ethan?" Ivy's voice was small now, scared the 11-year-old child instead of the trauma survivor. "What if we can't prove it? What if he wins and I have to go live with him?" Ethan crouched beside her bed, looked her straight in the eyes. "Then we'll find you again. However long it takes. We won't let you disappear. You promise?" It was the kind of promise he had no right to make, the kind that could shatter into 1,000 pieces against the reality of family courts and money and power and men like Gavin who knew how to work the system. But he made it anyway. "I promise." Outside, the sky was starting to lighten, that particular shade of deep blue that comes right before dawn when the world is holding its breath between night and day. They had 43 hours and 17 minutes until the custody hearing. They had theories and drawings and puzzle pieces that were starting to form a picture of something monstrous. What they didn't have was proof. Not yet. The proof came in pieces like shrapnel from an explosion, each fragment sharp enough to draw blood. Charlotte's forensic accountant, a woman named Diana Reeves, who looked like a suburban mom, but had taken down 3 Fortune 500 executives for embezzlement, arrived at the Voss estate at 6:47 a.m. with a laptop and an expression that could cut glass. She sat up at the dining table in the main house, declined coffee, and got straight to work, pulling financial records that Gavin thought he'd buried deep enough to stay hidden forever. Ethan stood at the window watching the sun rise over manicured lawns that probably cost more to maintain than his annual salary, and felt the weight of every passing minute. 39 hours until the custody hearing. 39 hours to build a case that would stand up against Gavin's money, his lawyers, his carefully constructed narrative of the devoted father trying to save his daughter from an unhinged ex-wife, and her pet charlatan. "Got something," Diana said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. July 2023, 3 weeks before the merger announcement. Gavin made a series of trades through an offshore account Cayman Islands holding company very cleverly structured to look like unrelated investments. But the timing is suspicious. He shorted Kepler stock, went long on 3 of their competitors, and positioned himself perfectly for the merger to collapse. Charlotte leaned over Diana's shoulder, her face pale in the laptop's glow. "How much did he make?" "Approximately $4.2 million. Diana pulled up a spreadsheet that made Ethan's head hurt just looking at it. But here's the thing, he couldn't have known to make those specific moves unless he had access to Voss Biotech's internal merger analysis. The deal terms, the due diligence findings, the reasons you ultimately walked away from Kepler. That information was restricted to C-suite and board members only. And Gavin was on Kepler's board, but not ours," Charlotte said slowly. "So if he had our documents, he violated about 15 different securities laws." Diana smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. "This is criminal, Charlotte, not just civil penalties. We're talking SEC investigation, possible prison time, if we can prove he had those documents." "We can prove it." Ivy's voice came from the doorway. She stood there in pajamas and bare feet, her hair unbrushed, Charlotte's phone clutched in her hand. "I took pictures." The room went silent. "What?" Charlotte moved toward her daughter, careful not to spook her. "Sweetheart, what pictures?" "Of the papers," Ivy said. "After the accident, while Gavin was outside the car talking to the cameraman. I knew something was wrong, so I used his phone. He'd dropped it on the center console. I took pictures of the papers before he took them." Ethan felt his heart stop. "Ivy, do you still have that phone?" "No, he took it back." "But—" She held up Charlotte's phone. "I airdropped them to myself, to my tablet. I thought maybe Mom would see them eventually. Figure out what he did. But then I couldn't talk anymore, and I forgot until just now, until I saw you looking at financial things, and I remembered." Charlotte's hands shook as she took the phone from Ivy. Opened the Photos app, scrolled back 18 months. And there they were. Blurry, taken in panic by a child's hands, but clear enough. Documents stamped, Voss Biotech Confidential, merger analysis, deal terms, due diligence reports, everything Gavin needed to make his trades. "Oh my God," Charlotte breathed. "Oh my God, baby, you brilliant, brilliant girl." Diana was already reaching for the phone. "I need to send these to the SEC immediately. With the trading records and these photos, we have a clear chain of evidence for insider trading. This is airtight." But Ethan was thinking 3 steps ahead, his clinical brain overriding the relief. "It's airtight for insider trading, but it doesn't prove he caused the accident. It doesn't prove he had Colberry evidence, and it doesn't stop the custody hearing in—" He checked his watch. 38 hours. "No, but it gives us leverage," Charlotte said, her voice taking on that sharp CEO edge. "If Gavin knows we have evidence of securities fraud, if he knows he's facing federal charges, he'll fight harder," Ethan interrupted. "Desperate men don't surrender, Charlotte. They escalate. If he loses custody of Ivy, she can testify against him. His entire defense crumbles. So he'll do anything to make sure that doesn't happen." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Charlotte's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She looked at the screen, and her expression went cold. "It's Jeffrey Krause, Gavin's lawyer." She answered, putting it on speaker. "Yes." Krause's voice was smooth, professional, the kind of voice that won custody battles for celebrities and politicians. "Mrs. Voss, I'm calling as a courtesy to inform you that we're filing an emergency motion this morning to have Ivy removed from your home immediately pending the custody hearing. We have documentation of continued exposure to the unqualified individual who assaulted her at the gala." "He didn't assault her," Charlotte snapped. "And we have expert testimony from Dr. Raymond Finch indicating that the child is experiencing severe psychological distress, as a result of the experimental and dangerous interventions you've authorized. We also have social media documentation showing your increasingly erratic behavior and public statements that call into question your judgment. Ethan felt ice water in his veins. What social media documentation? There was a pause. Then Kraus said, "May I ask who's speaking?" Ethan Quill, the unqualified individual. "Ah, Mr. Quill." Kraus's tone shifted, became pointed. "Or should I say, Dr. Quill, former Dr. Quill. The neurological specialist who left medicine after his wife died under his care during an experimental treatment protocol." The room spun. Ethan gripped the edge of the table to steady himself. That's not what happened. Isn't it? According to the records Dr. Finch obtained from St. Margaret's Hospital, your wife Anna Quill was admitted after a car accident. You, as her spouse and as a neurological specialist on staff, insisted on personally directing her care, despite obvious conflict of interest. You administered experimental therapies that weren't approved by the hospital board. And when those therapies failed, when she declined rapidly, you made the decision to withdraw life support against the recommendations of other physicians. "You son of a bitch," Ethan whispered. "The truth is difficult, I know." Kraus continued, relentless. "But it's relevant to this case. You have a history of making dangerous medical decisions based on personal emotional investment, rather than sound clinical judgment. And now you're doing the same thing with Ivy Voss. So yes, Mr. Quill, we absolutely have grounds to call this assault. Psychological assault. Medical assault. And Mrs. Voss is complicit." Charlotte's face had gone white. "Get off my phone, Jeffrey. Emergency removal hearing is at 2 p.m. today. Judge Martinson Family Court. I suggest you bring a very good lawyer." He hung up. The silence that followed was suffocating. Ivy stood frozen in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. Diana looked uncomfortable, like she'd witnessed something too intimate, too raw, and Ethan felt like he was drowning, like every breath was water filling his lungs. "Is that true?" Ivy asked, her voice small. "About your wife?" Ethan couldn't look at her. "Some of it. The parts that matter, yes. Anna died because I thought I knew better than everyone else. Because I couldn't let go. Because you loved her." Charlotte interrupted, her voice fierce. "Because you tried everything to save her, and sometimes everything isn't enough. That's not the same as what Gavin's lawyer is trying to paint." "But it'll play that way in court," Ethan said flatly. "Finch has twisted the truth just enough that it sounds damning. Experimental therapies were standard FND protocols, but administered to my wife, they become evidence of my recklessness. The other physicians who recommended continued life support were respecting her advance directive. She'd made me promise that if she was ever brain dead, I wouldn't keep her on machines. But that becomes me making unilateral decisions. They've built a narrative and it's..." His voice broke. "It's convincing." Diana closed her laptop carefully. "Charlotte, I need to be honest with you. If they bring all of this up in the custody hearing, if Dr. Finch testifies to Ethan's history and paints the current situation as history repeating itself, you're going to lose, even with the insider trading evidence. Because family court prioritizes the child's immediate safety, and they've constructed a scenario where Ivy is in immediate danger under your care." "So what do we do?" Charlotte demanded. "Just hand her over to a man who staged an accident and calculated whether his daughter should live or die." "We prove it," Ethan said quietly. He stood up, pulled himself together through sheer force of will. "We prove every single piece of what actually happened. Not theories, not drawings. Cold, hard evidence that even Gavin's lawyers can't spin." "In 37 hours. Diana raised an eyebrow. "In 37 hours. Ethan turned to Charlotte. "You said Sergeant Cole was the responding officer. Do you have his report? The full police report, not just the summary?" Charlotte nodded, moving to her home office. She came back with a folder that had clearly been opened and reopened many times, the pages worn at the edges. "Here. Mechanical failure, Tire blowout, no negligence. Cole's signature dated the day after the accident. Ethan read through it carefully, his clinical training kicking in, looking for what wasn't said rather than what was. There's no mention of traffic cameras. Millbrook Highway has cameras every half mile for traffic monitoring, but Cole's report doesn't reference checking footage. Standard procedure would be to pull camera footage for any accident involving a minor, Diana said, even if no charges were filed. Unless someone didn't want that footage pulled, Charlotte said slowly. Because it would show the cameraman already waiting on the side of the road. It would show Gavin taking documents from the car. It would show him leaving Ivy alone for 15 minutes. Ethan pulled out his phone, called a number he hadn't dialed in 5 years. It rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. "Detective Morrison." "Jack, it's Ethan Quill." A long pause. "Jesus, Ethan. It's been years. How are you?" "Been better. Listen, I need a favor and I need it fast. I'm looking into an accident report from 18 months ago. Millbrook Highway Sergeant Marcus Cole responding. Something's off about it, and I need to know if you can access the traffic camera footage from that date." "Cole's Highway Patrol, not my jurisdiction," Morrison said carefully. "But I can ask around." "What's this about?" "A little girl who watched her father commit a felony and then went silent for 18 months. And now he's trying to take custody so she can't testify." Ethan took a breath. "Jack, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't life and death." Morrison was quiet for a moment. "The accident was on Millbrook near the Riverside exit." "Yes." "That's exit 47. Cameras are maintained by the state DOT. Footage is kept for 90 days, then archived to the cloud for another year before permanent deletion." Morrison's voice shifted, became more alert. "Ethan, if this accident was 18 months ago, the footage is still in archive. Someone just has to request it." "Can you request it?" "Not officially. I'd need probable cause for an investigation. But..." Morrison paused. "There's a case I've been working. Financial fraud, offshore accounts, possible connection to public corruption. If this Sergeant Cole was on someone's payroll, if he buried evidence that connects to my investigation, I can pull the footage as part of a broader inquiry." Ethan felt hope flare in his chest. "How fast?" "Give me 6 hours. We have 36 until the emergency custody hearing. Then I'll work faster." Morrison hung up. Charlotte was staring at him with something like wonder. You just got a police detective to open an investigation in one phone call." "Jack Morrison and I worked together years ago on a case involving a patient with suspicious injuries. Turned out to be domestic abuse that the responding officers had covered up. We broke it open together. He owes me." Ethan rubbed his face, exhaustion catching up to him. "Or he did until I cashed in the favor just now." "We still have the 2:00 p.m. emergency hearing," Diana reminded them. "If the judge orders Ivy removed from Charlotte's custody today, the camera's footage won't matter. She'll be with Gavin before we can use it." "Then we need to make sure that doesn't happen," Charlotte said. She pulled out her phone, started scrolling through contacts. "I'm calling our corporate litigation team. If Gavin's lawyer wants to play games, he's about to find out what happens when you threaten Voss Biotech's CEO." But Ethan was thinking about Dr. Finch, about the expert testimony that was going to bury him in that courtroom, about the way Finch had twisted the truth about Anna's death into something monstrous. There had to be something, some angle, some leverage. His phone rang. Sarah Chen. "Please tell me you have good news," Ethan answered. "Better than good. I've been digging into Finch's recent consultations." Sarah's voice was tight with anger. "Ethan, do you know how much he's being paid to testify in your case? I assume Gavin's paying him well." $250,000, as a consulting fee for his expert opinion on FND treatment protocols. Sarah let that sink in. "But here's the thing. Finch is also a paid advisor to the Thorne Family Trust. Has been for 3 years. Gavin's been paying him quarterly retainers for medical investment advice. It's a massive conflict of interest, and he didn't disclose it." Ethan's mind raced. "Can you prove that?" "I can do better than prove it. I can get it admitted into evidence. I'm filing a motion to strike Finch's testimony based on undisclosed financial relationship with Gavin. It won't stop today's emergency hearing, but it'll blow up the main custody case. Sarah, if you do this, if you get involved in this case, Finch will come after you too. Let him try. Sarah's voice was steel. What he's doing isn't just unethical, Ethan. It's illegal. Expert witnesses are required to disclose financial relationships with parties in a case. He's committing perjury by omission. And I'm not going to let him destroy you with lies while pretending it's medicine. After she hung up, Ethan stood there holding his phone, feeling something shift. They were building a case, piece by piece, fragment by fragment. But would it be enough? At 1:47 p.m., Charlotte's legal team, 3 lawyers in matching suits who looked like they'd walked out of a corporate thriller, gathered in the Voss living room for a briefing before the emergency hearing. The lead attorney, a woman named Patricia Holloway, who radiated competent fury, laid out their strategy. We're going to argue that removing Ivy from Charlotte's care would cause immediate psychological harm to the child, Patricia said. We have documentation of her recent progress statements from the private nurse about improvements in engagement and responsiveness. We're going to paint Gavin's motion as vindictive harassment by an ex-spouse with financial motivation. Will that be enough? Charlotte asked. Patricia hesitated. In family court, immediate safety concerns override almost everything else. If Gavin's team convinces Judge Martinson that Ivy is in danger, psychological danger counts, the judge will err on the side of caution, but will fight like hell. They drove to the courthouse in Charlotte's Mercedes, the city sliding past the windows in a blur of gray buildings and indifferent pedestrians. Ethan sat in the back Nova beside him, holding Mr. Whiskers Ivy on Charlotte's other side, staring out at the world she'd been absent from for so long. What happens if they make me go with him? Ivy asked quietly. Charlotte's hand found her daughter's. That's not going to happen. But what if it does? Then we appeal. We fight. We don't stop until you're safe. Charlotte's voice was fierce, but Ethan could hear the fear underneath. The courthouse was modern and sterile, all glass and metal, and the kind of institutional cleanliness that felt hostile to human emotion. They went through security, rode an elevator to the 4th floor, walked down a corridor that smelled like floor wax and broken families. Gavin was already there. He stood with Jeffrey Krause and a woman in a conservative suit who must be his second chair, looking every inch the concerned father. Silver hair, perfectly styled, expensive but understated suit, an expression of dignified worry that probably played well for judges. When he saw Ivy, his face brightened with what would look like joy to anyone who hadn't seen him calculate his daughter's worth in a crashed car. Ivy, sweetheart. Gavin started toward them, arms outstretched. Ivy pressed back against Charlotte, her breathing accelerating. No. It's okay, baby. It's just your dad. No. Louder this time. Don't let him touch me. Patricia stepped between them smoothly. Mr. Thorne, please respect the child's space. All contact should wait until the hearing. Gavin's concerned expression didn't waver, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Of course, I'm just worried about her. You can understand that, can't you? Before anyone could respond, a court officer called them into the courtroom. Judge Carol Martinson presided, a woman in her early 60s with gray hair and reading glasses perched on her nose, the kind of judge who'd seen every custody battle variation humanity could produce and was tired of all of them. This is an emergency motion for temporary custody modification, Judge Martinson said, shuffling papers. Mr. Krause, your motion. What followed was a masterclass in legal character assassination. Krause laid out his case with surgical precision. Charlotte's erratic behavior, her decision to allow an unlicensed individual to conduct experimental psychological interventions with her disabled daughter's social media posts showing her emotional instability, and most damningly, Ethan's history. Dr. Ethan Quill, or rather former Dr. Quill, has a documented history of boundary violations in medical practice. Krause said, his voice carrying the weight of apparent concern. His wife died under his direct care after he administered treatments that other physicians questioned. He left medicine under a cloud of ethical concerns. And now Mrs. Voss has given this individual unrestricted access to her vulnerable, nonverbal daughter. Your Honor. Patricia stood. Mr. Quill has not been treating Ivy Voss in any medical capacity. He's simply been present in the home as a what? Krauss interrupted. A family friend. According to Mrs. Voss's own security logs, Mr. Quill and his daughter have been living in the guest house for the past 10 days. They spend unsupervised hours alone with Ivy. Mrs. Voss admitted in a text message to her sister, which we have submitted as evidence, that she's hoping Mr. Quill can cure Ivy. That's not friendship. That's medical treatment by an unlicensed practitioner. Judge Martinson looked at Charlotte over her reading glasses. Mrs. Voss, is this accurate? You've had Mr. Quill staying on your property for 10 days, conducting therapy with your daughter. Charlotte stood. Your Honor, my daughter has shown more progress in the last 10 days than in the previous 18 months. She's speaking, she's moving, she's coming back to us. Whatever Mr. Quill is doing is illegal. Krauss cut in. And potentially harmful. We have Dr. Raymond Finch standing by to testify via video conference about the dangers of unregulated trauma therapy with minors. I'd like to hear from Dr. Finch, Judge Martinson said, gesturing to the bailiff. Set up the video. But as the bailiff fumbled with the laptop, the courtroom door opened. Detective Jack Morrison stepped in, looking official and grim, with a woman Ethan didn't recognize, badge visible federal by the look of her. Your Honor, Morrison said. Detective Jack Morrison, Metro PD, and this is Special Agent Lisa Torres, SEC. We apologize for the interruption, but we have information relevant to this case. Judge Martinson frowned. Detective, this is a family court matter. It's also potentially a criminal matter, Your Honor. Agent Torres stepped forward. We've been investigating securities fraud involving Mr. Gavin Thorne, and in the course of that investigation, we've discovered evidence that directly pertains to the child's welfare and Mr. Thorne's fitness as a custodial parent. The courtroom went still. Gavin's face went pale. Krauss was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. It's also highly relevant, Morrison interrupted. He held up a tablet. Your Honor, we've recovered archived traffic camera footage from the accident involving Ivy Thorne 18 months ago. With your permission, I'd like to play it. Judge Martinson looked like she wanted to refuse, like she knew opening this door would turn a simple custody hearing into something much more complicated. But she nodded slowly. Go ahead, Detective. The bailiff connected Morrison's tablet to the courtroom's display. And then they all watched as the truth played out in grainy black and white footage. The timestamp read 4:45 p.m. A silver Lexus sedan. Charlotte's car was visible on the highway. And on the shoulder already parked was a dark SUV with a man standing beside it, holding a camera. At 4:47 p.m., the Lexus's tire blew. The car swerved, hit the guardrail, came to a stop. Both front doors opened. Gavin got out, looked at the cameraman, gave a thumbs up. The cameraman started filming. And for 15 minutes, that felt like hours watching the footage. Gavin stood outside the car talking on his phone while his daughter sat alone inside. At one point, he opened the passenger door, reached into the glove compartment, pulled out documents, returned to his car, and put them in his trunk. All while the cameraman filmed. All while Ivy sat motionless in the passenger seat. At 5:02 p.m., Gavin finally made a call. 4 minutes later, police arrived. Sergeant Marcus Cole, who walked directly to Gavin, shook his hand, and spent 3 minutes talking before even approaching the damaged vehicle to check on the child inside. The video ended. The courtroom was silent. Then, Ivy stood up. Actually stood, pushing herself out of her wheelchair with shaking legs, gripping the table for support. He left me, she said, her voice carrying through the room. He took Mom's papers, and he left me. And I knew if the car caught fire, if something happened, he wouldn't come back. So I stopped moving, because if I couldn't move, couldn't talk, couldn't tell anyone what I saw, maybe he'd let me live. Charlotte was crying, her hand pressed to her mouth. Gavin looked like he might vomit. Krause was frantically conferring with his client in whispers. And Judge Martinson was staring at Ivy with an expression of horror and dawning understanding. Sergeant Cole, Agent Torres continued, received 4 payments of $5,000 each in the month following the accident. Payments from an LLC owned by Mr. Thorne. In exchange, Cole filed a report that omitted key evidence and claimed traffic camera footage was unavailable. We are bringing charges against Cole for obstruction of justice and against Mr. Thorne for insider trading evidence, tampering, child endangerment, and potentially attempted murder. Your Honor. Krause started. Sit down, Mr. Krause. Judge Martinson said, her voice like ice. Mr. Thorne, you're going to remain in this courtroom while I hear testimony. And then you're going to leave in police custody. Your emergency motion is denied. Mrs. Voss retains sole legal and physical custody of Ivy, and you're going to be very lucky if you ever see your daughter again outside of supervised prison visitation. Gavin's face crumpled. You don't understand the papers she's talking about. They were already compromised. The merger was already... Stop talking, Krause hissed. Gavin, for God's sake, stop talking. But Gavin couldn't stop. Fear made him reckless. I did it for us. For Ivy's future. The trust fund, the college money. You did it for money, Charlotte said, standing. You calculated my daughter's worth in dollars, and when she became a liability, you tried to silence her. But she's not silent anymore. Judge Martinson adjourned the hearing. Federal agents materialized to take Gavin into custody. Morrison pulled Ethan aside, shook his hand. Your kid called me an hour ago, Morrison said quietly. Your daughter Nova. She told me you needed help faster than 6 hours. Smart kid. Ethan felt his throat tighten. Thank you, Jack. Don't thank me. Thank that little girl. Morrison nodded toward Ivy, who was still standing, still holding onto the table, tears streaming down her face. She's the one who saved herself. We just provided the evidence. Outside the courthouse, under a sky that had forgotten how to rain, Charlotte knelt in front of her daughter, who was standing, shaking, exhausted, but standing, and said, You're free. You're finally free. And Ivy, 11 years old, traumatized and healing, looked at her mother and whispered, I know. I can feel it. They had 32 hours until the full custody hearing, but it didn't matter anymore. Gavin's lawyers would withdraw. The SEC would move forward with prosecution. Dr. Finch's testimony would be struck for conflict of interest. And Ivy would keep healing slowly, imperfectly, but healing. Ethan stood apart from them, watching this family knit itself back together, wondering if he'd done enough, or if he'd just gotten lucky. Wondering if Anna would be proud or horrified that he'd risked everything on another damaged person when he'd failed to save her. His phone buzzed, another text from the unknown number. But this time, it wasn't a threat, it was a confession. This is Cole. They're arresting me tomorrow. Before they do, you should know. Gavin filmed the whole thing, his insurance policy. The original video file is on his personal server, password protected. Server address 192.168.1.247. Password Ivy 2012. He kept it as leverage against the cameraman. Now it's leverage against him. Destroy me, but save the kid. Ethan stared at the message, then forwarded it to Agent Torres. One more piece of evidence. One more nail in Gavin's coffin. Charlotte walked over Ivy, leaning heavily against her mother, barely staying upright. Nova's in the car with Patricia, Charlotte said. We're going home, all of us. And then we're going to sleep for approximately 16 hours and wake up in a world where my daughter is safe. And after that? Ethan asked. Charlotte looked at him for a long moment. After that, we figure out what healing really looks like. No more emergency interventions, no more crisis mode, just time and safety and whatever it takes. I'm not a doctor anymore, Ethan said. I can't. You're something better. Ivy interrupted, her voice hoarse but certain. You're someone who sees people, not patients, not cases. People. That's what I needed. That's what Mom needed. That's... She swayed on her feet, and Charlotte caught her. Okay, that's enough standing for one day, Charlotte said. Back in the chair, baby. We've got time now. We've got all the time in the world. They drove back to the estate as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and hope. Nova chattered about the courtroom, about how she'd called Detective Morrison herself because Dad was too busy being noble to ask for help fast enough. About how Ivy needed to teach her how to draw because those pictures were amazing and kind of scary. And somewhere in the middle of that ordinary beautiful chaos, Ethan felt something unclench in his chest. Something that had been tight and closed since Anna died. It wasn't forgiveness. He wasn't sure he'd ever forgive himself for the choices he'd made 5 years ago. But it was space. Room to breathe. Permission to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could help people heal without destroying himself in the process. They pulled up to the guest house just as full dark fell. Charlotte helped Ivy inside, got her settled on the sofa. Nova immediately claimed the spot beside her, pulling out Mr. Whiskers and Reginald the T-Rex like they were about to have the world's most important stuffed animal convention. I'm ordering pizza, Charlotte announced. All the pizza, every topping. We're celebrating. Celebrating what? Ivy asked. Charlotte smiled, and it was the first real smile Ethan had seen from her, the kind that wasn't weighted with terror or desperation. Celebrating you, baby. Celebrating you being brave and strong and absolutely remarkable. And celebrating Dad not being a total idiot, Nova added. This time. Everyone laughed, even Ethan, because what else could you do when you'd stared into darkness and somehow stumbled back into light? They ate pizza on the guest house floor because the coffee table was covered in Legos and drawings and the beautiful debris of childhood. They told stories, carefully edited, nothing too heavy, and made plans that extended further than the next crisis, further than tomorrow's hearing, into a future that suddenly seemed possible. And when Nova and Ivy both fell asleep on the sofa, exhausted from emotion and trauma and the weight of finally being safe, Charlotte looked at Ethan across the darkened room and said quietly, "Thank you for seeing her, for not giving up." "Thank Nova," Ethan said, "and Ivy. They did the real work. I just held space for it." "That's everything," Charlotte said. Holding space, being present, not trying to fix things that can't be fixed quickly, just being there. She paused. "I'm creating a foundation, the Anna Quill Foundation for FND Research and Treatment, if you'll let me use her name." Ethan felt his eyes burn. "She'd like that. His voice broke. "She'd be proud." "I think she'd be proud of you," Charlotte said softly. "I think she'd see what I see. Someone who loved enough to risk everything. Someone who failed and learned and chose to try again anyway. That's not recklessness, Ethan. That's courage." Outside, the night was full of stars and silence and the particular peace that comes after storms. Inside, 2 little girls slept safe and sound, dreaming dreams that weren't nightmares anymore. And 2 broken adults sat together in the dark, not fixing each other, not trying to erase the past, just existing in the space between damage and healing, between guilt and grace, between the people they'd been and the people they might still become. It wasn't a happy ending. It was barely even an ending at all. Just a pause, a breath, a moment of equilibrium before the next challenge, the next crisis, the next impossible choice. But for now, in this moment, it was enough. The morning of the full custody hearing arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that felt almost defiant, like the universe itself was declaring that truth would win today, whether anyone was ready for it or not. Ethan woke before dawn, his internal clock still programmed for night shifts. He didn't work anymore and found Charlotte already awake in the guesthouse kitchen making coffee with hands that only shook slightly. She'd aged in the past 2 weeks, or maybe she'd just stopped hiding the weight she'd been carrying for 18 months. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, though the answer was obvious. "Haven't really slept since the accident," Charlotte admitted, pouring 2 cups. "Just pretended. Got good at pretending a lot of things." She handed him coffee that was too hot and too strong, exactly what he needed. The SEC formally charged Gavin yesterday. Wire fraud, securities violations, obstruction of justice. His lawyers are already floating a plea deal. "That's good. It's not enough." Charlotte's voice was flat, exhausted. "He tried to kill our daughter, or at least he decided her life wasn't worth inconveniencing his schedule. And he'll probably serve 3 to 5 years in minimum security, come out with his trust fund intact, and tell everyone he made a mistake in judgment. That's not justice, Ethan. That's just—" She stopped, shook her head. "Sorry, I'm not usually this bitter before caffeine." "You're entitled to bitter," Ethan said. "You're entitled to a lot more than bitter." They sat in silence, watching dawn paint the sky in shades of pearl and rose. Somewhere in the house, Nova and Ivy were still sleeping, curled up together in Ivy's room. Nova had insisted on a sleepover, said Ivy needed someone to make sure the nightmares don't come back, and the image of his daughter, barely 9 years old, appointing herself as guardian against trauma, made Ethan's chest ache with pride and guilt in equal measure. At 7:30, Charlotte's legal team arrived with suits and strategy, and that particular brand of controlled aggression that came with billing $800 an hour. Patricia Holloway spread files across the dining table like she was preparing for war, which Ethan supposed she was. "Here's where we stand," Patricia said without preamble. "Gavin's legal team has withdrawn his custody petition. With the federal charges, they know they can't win. But we're still going before Judge Martinson to formalize sole custody for Charlotte and to establish a protection order. Gavin's lawyers are going to argue for eventual supervised visitation rights once he's served his sentence, once he's completed therapy, etc. We're going to argue for permanent termination of parental rights based on endangerment." "Can we win that?" Charlotte asked. Patricia's expression was carefully neutral. "It's difficult. Family courts prefer to maintain parental relationships when possible. But with Ivy's testimony, with the evidence of premeditation, with his clear prioritization of financial gain over her safety, we have a shot." "I want him gone," Charlotte said flatly. "I want him legally, permanently gone from her life. I don't care if that makes me vindictive. I don't care if that makes me the bitter ex-wife." He calculated whether our daughter should live or die and decided she was more useful alive only if she stayed silent. That's not a parent. That's a monster wearing a parent's face. Patricia nodded slowly. "Then we fight for termination. But Charlotte, you need to be prepared. Ivy will have to testify. On the stand. In front of Gavin. Describing what happened. Are you sure she's ready for that?" The question hung in the air like smoke. "I'm ready." They all turned. Ivy stood in the doorway, still in her pajamas, her hair a blonde tangle, leaning on the walker that her physical therapist had brought by yesterday. She was shaking from exhaustion, from fear, from the sheer effort of standing, but her eyes were clear and determined. "Ivy, sweetheart, you don't have to," Charlotte started. "Yes, I do." Ivy took a step forward, the walker's wheels squeaking slightly on the hardwood floor. "He kept me silent for 18 months. He made me disappear inside my own body. And if I don't tell the judge what he did, if I don't say it out loud in a room where it matters, then he still wins. Even if he goes to prison, even if you get custody, he still wins because I'm still letting him keep me quiet." Nova appeared behind Ivy, Mr. Whiskers tucked under one arm. "I'll go with her," Nova announced. "Not on the stand, obviously, because that would be weird, but in the courtroom. So she knows someone's there who isn't scared of what she has to say." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "Nova, you don't have to." "Dad, seriously, we already talked about this." Nova rolled her eyes with the exasperation of a 9-year-old who'd somehow become the most emotionally mature person in the room. "Ivy needs backup. I'm good at backup. Remember when you had that panic attack at the grocery store last year and I talked you through it? Same thing, just fancier location. The fact that his daughter remembered his breakdown, remembered coaching him through breathing exercises, while other shoppers pretended not to notice, felt like a knife and a gift simultaneously. Okay. Ethan said, his voice rough. Okay, we all go. We all see this through. Patricia looked between them with something like wonder. You people are either the bravest or the most reckless family I've ever represented. Possibly both. We're not a family, Charlotte said automatically, then stopped. Looked at Ethan, at Nova, at Ivy. Or maybe we are. Maybe family is just people who show up when everything's on fire and decide to stay anyway. They dressed in careful layers of respectability. Charlotte in a suit that said, Competent CEO Ivy, in a dress that said Innocent Child, who'd been through hell, Nova, in her best school outfit with only one visible stain. Ethan in the one button-down shirt he owned, that didn't have a frayed collar. They looked collectively like people who belonged in a courtroom. Like people who deserved to be taken seriously. The drive to the courthouse was silent except for Nova's running commentary on everything they passed, her voice filling the spaces where fear tried to take root. Ivy sat pressed against the window, her hand clutching Mr. Whiskers she'd insisted on bringing him, and no one had the heart to argue. The courthouse steps felt steeper today, or maybe Ethan was just more aware of how hard they'd be for Ivy to climb. But she managed one slow step at a time, refusing Charlotte's offers of help, her face set in determination that was heartbreaking and inspiring in equal measure. Inside the hallway, outside Judge Martinson's courtroom, was crowded. Reporters, someone had leaked the story. Probably Gavin's team trying to control the narrative, pressed forward with cameras and shouted questions that security held back. Ethan kept himself between them and the girls, his body a shield, even though his heart was hammering hard enough to make his vision swim. And then he saw Dr. Raymond Finch. The man stood near the courtroom entrance, consulting with someone who looked like another expert witness, and when he saw Ethan, something cold and triumphant flickered in his expression. He walked over with the confident stride of someone who knew he held all the cards. Ethan. Finch said, his voice carrying that particular academic condescension that made Ethan want to punch him in his perfectly straight teeth. I'm surprised you're here. I assumed after my testimony was submitted you'd have the good sense to remove yourself from this situation. Your testimony is being challenged, Ethan said quietly. Dr. Sarah Chen filed a motion to strike based on your undisclosed financial relationship with Gavin Thorne. Finch's smile didn't waver. A relationship that's fully documented and perfectly legal. I advise multiple clients on medical investments. There's no conflict of interest. You're being paid $250,000 to testify against me, Ethan said. By the same man who's paying you quarterly retainers. That's not consulting Ray. That's buying an opinion. My opinion is based on sound medical judgment, Finch countered. You're an unlicensed practitioner performing unregulated trauma therapy on a vulnerable minor. That's malpractice regardless of who's paying me to say it. It's not malpractice. The voice came from behind them. Dr. Sarah Chen walked up, flanked by two other physicians Ethan recognized from St. Margaret's. It's pattern interrupt therapy, and it's a recognized FND treatment protocol. I'm testifying today, Ray. So are Dr. Morrison and Dr. Patel. We're going to explain exactly what Ethan did, why it worked, and how your characterization of it as dangerous experimentation is not only inaccurate, but professionally irresponsible. Finch's smile finally cracked. You're making a mistake, Sarah. No, I'm correcting one. Sarah looked at Ethan and her expression was fierce. We should have done this 5 years ago. Should have fought for you when you left. Should have made it clear that Anna's death wasn't your failure, it was just tragedy. We failed you then. We're not failing you now. Before Finch could respond, the courtroom doors opened. Judge Martinson's bailiff called them inside. The courtroom was smaller than Ethan expected, more intimate, which somehow made everything feel more intense. They took their seats. Charlotte and Ivy at the plaintiff's table with Patricia and her team, Ethan and Nova in the front row of the gallery, close enough to reach if needed. Across the aisle, Gavin sat with his lawyers, looking diminished somehow, like the federal charges had already started eating away at whatever made him seem powerful. When Gavin's eyes found Ivy, he smiled. It was meant to look paternal, loving, the smile of a father seeing his daughter. But Ivy saw through it. Her entire body went rigid, her breathing shallow, and Ethan leaned forward, caught her attention, mouthed the breathing pattern they'd practiced. In, out, in, out. Ivy's hand found the edge of the table, gripped it, held on. Judge Martinson entered. Everyone stood, sat again. The proceeding began with procedural matters that meant nothing and everything, jurisdiction standing the scope of today's hearing. And then Patricia stood to present their case. She laid it out methodically, building the narrative piece by piece. The accident, the suspicious circumstances, the 18 months of silence, Gavin's pattern of prioritizing financial gain over his daughter's well-being, the insider trading charges, the evidence tampering, the SEC investigation, each fact another brick in a wall that was slowly, inexorably boxing Gavin into a corner he couldn't escape. "Your Honor," Patricia said, "we're asking for termination of parental rights on the grounds that Mr. Thorne presents a clear and ongoing danger to this child's physical and psychological safety. And we have testimony from the child herself to support this." Gavin's lawyer, a different one now, Krause had apparently declined to continue representing a client facing federal charges, stood quickly. "Your Honor, the child has been under the influence of the unlicensed practitioner for weeks. Any testimony she provides is potentially compromised by false memory implantation, by coaching, by, I wasn't coached." Ivy's voice cut through the courtroom, clear and strong. "I remember everything. I remembered it while I couldn't talk. I remembered it every day for 18 months. And I'm ready to testify." Judge Martinson looked at Ivy for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Young lady, you understand what testimony means. You'll be under oath. You'll be answering questions from both sides. Your father's lawyer will question you. It might be difficult." "I understand," Ivy said. "I'm ready." "Very well." Judge Martinson gestured to the witness stand. "Please approach." What happened next would replay in Ethan's mind for the rest of his life. Ivy stood from her wheelchair, not with the walker, not with assistance, just stood, her legs shaking, her whole body trembling with effort, and walked to the witness stand. 6 steps, 7, 8, each one a victory against the trauma that had tried to swallow her whole. Charlotte was crying silently, her hand pressed to her mouth. Nova was gripping Ethan's arm, hard enough to bruise. Across the aisle, Gavin had gone white, like he was watching a ghost. Because that's what Ivy was supposed to be. A ghost. A silent witness to his crimes, who could never testify because she couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't accuse. But she was walking. Ivy reached the witness stand, was sworn in, sat down with her hands folded in her lap and her chin raised high. The bailiff adjusted the microphone down to her level. Patricia approached gently. "Ivy, I'm going to ask you some questions about the day of the accident. If you need to stop at any time, just let me know." "Okay." "Okay. Can you tell the judge what you remember about that day? Start from when your father picked you up from piano lessons." Ivy took a breath, looked at Charlotte, looked at Nova, looked at Ethan, then began to speak. She told it all. The tire blowing sudden, terrifying. The car swerving into the guardrail. The impact. Her father getting out of the car, looking at the man with the camera, giving a thumbs up like they'd rehearsed. Standing outside for 15 minutes while Ivy sat alone, terrified, watching him take documents from the glove compartment. Watching him decide whether she was worth saving. "I took pictures," Ivy said, her voice steady, despite the tears streaming down her face. "With his phone. Of the papers. Because I knew something was wrong. I knew he wasn't being a dad. He was being something else, something scary. And after the accident, Patricia prompted gently, after you went to the hospital, I couldn't move anymore. Ivy's voice went quiet. Not because I was hurt, because my brain decided that moving was dangerous, that talking was dangerous, that being a person who could tell what she saw, that was the most dangerous thing of all. So I stopped. I just stopped existing. It felt safer than being alive. Judge Martinson leaned forward. Ivy, what made you start moving again? And here it was, the question that everything had been building toward. Ivy looked directly at Ethan. Mr. Ethan asked me to dance. The courtroom went silent. At the gala, Ivy continued, when I was in my wheelchair and everyone was looking at me like I was broken, like I was this sad, tragic thing that needed to be pitied. But Mr. Ethan looked at me different. He looked at me like I was just a girl who might want to dance. And that, her voice broke. That made me remember that I used to be a person. Before the accident, before I stopped moving, I used to be Ivy who liked piano and dinosaurs and staying up past bedtime reading with a flashlight. And Mr. Ethan saw that person, even though she'd been gone for 18 months. He saw her and he asked if she wanted to come back. Charlotte was sobbing openly now, not even trying to hide it. Nova had buried her face in Ethan's shoulder, and Ethan felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been locked tight since Anna died. Your Honor, Ivy said, looking at Judge Martinson with eyes that were far too old. Mr. Ethan didn't hurt me. He didn't experiment on me. He just treated me like a human being instead of a medical problem. And that was the only thing that could bring me back. Not therapy, not medicine, just someone seeing me as a person worth inviting to dance. Patricia let that settle, then asked quietly, Ivy, do you feel safe with your father? No. Do you want to see your father now or in the future? No. Ivy's voice was firm. He left me in that car. He chose papers over me. He chose money over me. And when I couldn't talk anymore, when I couldn't tell anyone what he did, he tried to use it to take me away from Mom. He wanted me silent forever. That's not apparent. I don't know what that is, but it's not apparent. Gavin's lawyer stood for cross-examination, tried to poke holes in her testimony, suggested she'd been influenced, coached, manipulated. But Ivy answered every question with clear, unwavering certainty. And when the lawyer made the mistake of asking if she was sure she remembered correctly, if maybe her memory was confused, Ivy said, I drew it. All of it. The steering wheel, the cracked windshield, his hand with the cufflinks taking the papers, the phone filming. I drew it before I knew about the camera footage, before anyone told me what to remember. I drew it because it was burned into my brain, and the only way to make it stop replaying was to put it on paper. The lawyer sat down defeated. Then came Sarah Chen's testimony explaining FND, explaining pattern interrupt therapy, explaining why what Ethan did was grounded in legitimate clinical practice, even if it happened outside a traditional medical setting. She was followed by the other physicians from St. Margaret's, who testified about Ethan's work before he left, about his expertise about the fact that Anna's death was tragedy, not negligence. When it was Dr. Finch's turn, Patricia stood and said simply, Your Honor, we move to strike Dr. Finch's testimony based on undisclosed financial conflict of interest with the defendant. We have documentation showing he's received over $400,000 from Mr. Thorne's companies over the past 3 years, including the $250,000 consulting fee for this case specifically. Finch's face went red. Those are separate matters. They're matters you failed to disclose, Patricia interrupted, which calls into question the objectivity of your entire testimony. We also have affidavits from 3 other FND specialists, all more qualified than Dr. Finch, none with financial ties to either party, stating that Mr. Quill's approach was appropriate and effective. Judge Martinson looked at Finch with something like disgust. Dr. Finch, I'm striking your testimony, and I'm recommending the medical board review your consulting practices. You're dismissed. Finch left his professional reputation in tatters, and Ethan felt nothing. Not vindication, not satisfaction, just exhaustion. The hearing continued for another 3 hours. Financial records were submitted. The traffic camera footage was played again. Agent Torres testified about the SEC investigation, about the evidence of insider trading, about the charges that would likely send Gavin to federal prison. Detective Morrison testified about Sergeant Cole's corruption, about the buried evidence, about the systematic cover-up. And through it all, Ivy sat in the witness stand, having been told she could return to her seat, but choosing to stay, choosing to be present for every moment, every revelation, every piece of evidence that proved what her father really was. Finally, at 4:37 p.m., Judge Martinson called a 15-minute recess to review her decision. They waited in the hallway. Charlotte pacing Ivy, sitting with her legs stretched out, exhausted from standing, but refusing the wheelchair, refusing to go back. Nova shared her snacks, offered Mr. Whiskers for comfort, kept up a steady stream of chatter that was probably annoying, but felt like a lifeline. Ethan stood apart watching them and felt Charlotte's hand find his. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for seeing her, for believing she could come back when everyone else had given up, for—" her voice broke, "for giving me my daughter back." "I didn't do that," Ethan said. "She did it herself. I just held space for her to do it." "That's everything, though," Charlotte said. "Holding space, not trying to fix, not imposing timelines or expectations, just being present while someone finds their way back to themselves. That's the whole thing, Ethan. That's what love looks like." Before he could respond, the bailiff called them back in. Judge Martinson sat behind her bench, looking tired and grim and absolutely certain. "I've reviewed all the testimony and evidence," she said, "and I'm prepared to make my ruling. In the matter of custody of Ivy Thorne, I'm granting sole legal and physical custody to Charlotte Voss. Further, I'm terminating Gavin Thorne's parental rights permanently on the grounds of child endangerment, evidence tampering, and deliberate psychological harm to the minor child. Mr. Thorne will have no visitation rights, supervised or otherwise. No contact of any kind is permitted." Gavin stood, his voice desperate. "Your Honor, she's my daughter." "She was your daughter." Judge Martinson interrupted, her voice like ice. "You gave up that right when you calculated her worth in dollars and decided she was only valuable if she stayed silent. You're fortunate I can't charge you with attempted murder myself, Mr. Thorne. The federal charges will have to suffice." She looked at Charlotte. "Mrs. Voss Ivy is legally your daughter alone now. I'm also issuing a permanent protection order. If Mr. Thorne attempts any contact, he'll face additional criminal charges." Charlotte was crying again, but this time it sounded like relief, like 18 months of held breath finally released. As for Mr. Quill, Judge Martinson continued, and Ethan's stomach dropped. "I've reviewed the testimony about his role in Ivy's recovery, and while his methods were unconventional and technically outside the bounds of licensed medical practice, I find that his actions were in the child's best interest and caused no harm. In fact, they likely saved her life in ways that traditional medicine had failed to do." She looked at Ethan directly. "However, Mr. Quill, I strongly suggest you consider reinstating your medical license. This community needs practitioners who understand that healing isn't always about following protocols. Sometimes it's about remembering to see the person inside the patient." The gavel came down. The hearing was over. Ivy was free. They left the courthouse as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber and impossible hope. Reporters tried to stop them, but security held them back, and they made it to the car in a bubble of protection that felt fragile but real. On the drive back to the estate, Charlotte made a call. "David, it's Charlotte Voss. Yes, I know it's after hours. I need you to draft documents for a new foundation. The Anna Quill Foundation for Functional Neurological Disorder Research and Treatment. I'm putting in an initial endowment of $5 million, and I want Ethan Quill as the program director for community outreach and recovery protocols." She looked at Ethan in the rearview mirror, with the stipulation that he works normal business hours only. Evenings are reserved for his daughter. Non-negotiable. "Charlotte, I can't," Ethan started. "You can, and you will, because Ivy isn't the only child who needs someone to see them instead of fixing them. There are hundreds of kids, thousands may be trapped in their own bodies because trauma convinced their brains that being alive was too dangerous. And you know how to reach them, not as a doctor, as someone who understands what it means to lose everything and choose to try anyway." Ethan looked at Nova, who was grinning at him with pride that made his chest ache. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay. But I'm not going back to medicine. I'm not asking you to be Dr. Quill again," Charlotte said gently. "I'm asking you to be exactly who you are. The man who saw my daughter at a gala and asked her to dance. That's who this foundation needs. That's who those kids need." They pulled up to the estate as full dark fell. But instead of going inside, Charlotte drove past the main house, past the guest house, to the back lawn, where someone, probably the gardening staff at Charlotte's instruction, had set up string lights between the trees, turning the space into something magical. "What is this?" Ivy asked, wonder in her voice. Charlotte got out, opened Ivy's door, held out her hand. "This is your dance. The one you didn't get at the gala. The one you deserve. No cameras, no audience, no performance. Just dancing because you can. Because you're alive. Because you came back." Music started playing from speakers hidden somewhere in the trees. Not Claire de Lune this time. Something lighter, happier. A piano melody that sounded like sunlight. Charlotte took Ivy's hands, held them gently. "May I have this dance?" Ivy's smile could have lit up the entire city. "Yes." They danced slowly, carefully. Charlotte supporting Ivy when her legs got tired, both of them crying and laughing simultaneously. And then Nova joined them, and they were three figures moving in the golden light, beautiful and imperfect and absolutely real. Ethan stood apart watching and felt Anna's presence so strongly it was almost physical. Not haunting, not painful, just there. A gentle reminder that love doesn't end when life does. That the people we lose stay with us in the choices we make, in the courage we find in the moments we choose to reach out instead of staying safe. "She'd be proud of you," Charlotte said, appearing at his elbow. "Anna, she'd be proud." "I don't know about that," Ethan said, his voice rough. "I spent 5 years hiding, 5 years convincing myself I was protecting Nova by staying small, staying invisible, not risking anything." "And then you risked everything," Charlotte said simply. "You walked across a ballroom and asked a paralyzed girl to dance in front of 300 people who thought you were insane. That's not hiding, Ethan. That's the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do." "I did it because I couldn't not do it," Ethan admitted. "I saw her sitting there, saw everyone looking at her like she was broken, and I thought about all the ways people looked at me after Anna died, like I was broken, like I was just grief wearing a human shape, and I hated it, hated the pity. So I thought maybe Ivy hated it too. Maybe she just needed someone to look at her like she was still a person instead of a tragedy. That's why it worked," Charlotte said. "That's why she responded to you when she didn't respond to any of the specialists, any of the therapists. Because you didn't try to fix her. You just invited her to be human again." The music shifted to something slower. Nova grabbed Ethan's hand, pulled him toward the improvised dance floor. "Come on, Dad. You can't just watch. That's creepy." So Ethan danced with his daughter under string lights and stars, while Charlotte danced with Ivy, while the night wrapped around them like a promise that maybe broken things could still be beautiful. They danced until Ivy was too tired to stand, until Nova was yawning more than twirling, until Charlotte's professional composure had completely shattered into something softer and more human. And then they all collapsed on the lawn, breathless and happy, in a way that felt almost foreign after so much fear. "I'm going to get my medical license back," Ethan said suddenly, the words surprising him even as he spoke them. "Not to practice medicine, but to legitimize the work. So other kids like Ivy can access treatment that looks like this, like living, like being seen, like remembering how to be human." Charlotte squeezed his hand. "The foundation will support you. Whatever you need, however long it takes. And I'm going to help," Ivy announced, her voice sleepy but certain. "When I'm older, I'm going to help other kids who got trapped like I did. Tell them it's possible to come back. Show them it's worth trying." "Me too," Nova added. "I'm going to be like the best support person ever. I already have experience." They lay there on the grass, 4 people who'd been strangers 2 weeks ago and were now something else, not quite family, not quite friends, but something deeper and stranger and more necessary. People who'd seen each other's worst moments and chosen to stay. People who'd built something real in the wreckage of trauma and loss. Above them, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent and beautiful. The string lights swayed in the evening breeze, casting dancing shadows. And somewhere in the distance, the city hummed with its million small lives, its million small dramas, its endless cycle of breaking and healing and trying again. 3 months later, the Ethan Quill Foundation held its first community event, a gathering for families dealing with FND, with conversion disorders, with the particular hell of watching someone you love disappear into their own body. Ethan spoke not as Dr. Quill, but as himself, about loss and healing, and the difference between fixing and holding space. Ivy spoke too, her voice still shaky, but growing stronger, about the 18 months of silence, and the single invitation that had started bringing her back. 6 months after that, Ethan's medical license was reinstated, with the stipulation that he work only within the Foundation's programs, only with appropriate oversight, only with families who chose his approach. He said yes to all of it, grateful for the boundaries, grateful for the chance to help without the pressure of being someone's last hope. A year after the gala, on the anniversary of the night, everything changed. They gathered again under string lights on the Voss lawn. But this time, there were others, families from the Foundation, kids who'd been trapped and were finding their way back, parents who'd been drowning and had found something like solid ground. Ivy walked without assistance now most days. She still used the wheelchair when she was tired, still had moments when her body remembered trauma and shut down, but those moments were fewer and further between. She'd started piano lessons again, was working her way back to Claire de Lune, the piece that had unlocked her memory. Nova and Ivy were inseparable now, sisters in all but blood-trading stuffed animals and secrets, and the particular intimacy of kids who'd survived something together. Charlotte had stepped back from day-to-day operations at Voss Biotech to focus on the Foundation, had discovered she was better at building programs than building companies, had learned that sometimes scaling back wasn't failure, but wisdom. And Ethan had learned to live with the ghosts. Anna was still there, still a presence in his choices and his fears, but she wasn't a weight anymore. She was more like a compass pointing him toward courage, when he wanted to hide, reminding him that love meant risking everything, even when you might lose. "You know what the real reason was, don't you?" Charlotte asked him that anniversary night, watching Ivy dance with Nova to music that was too loud and too happy. "Why you asked her to dance that night at the gala? To break the pattern," Ethan said. "Pattern interrupt. Give her nervous system a shock big enough to—" "No," Charlotte interrupted gently. "That's the medical reason. The real reason, the one you probably didn't even realize, is that you saw yourself in her. You saw someone who'd disappeared into silence and stillness because the world was too painful to participate in. And you wanted to give her what no one gave you after Anna died. An invitation to come back. Permission to be human again, instead of just a tragedy people pitied." Ethan felt tears sting his eyes. "Maybe." "Definitely," Charlotte said. You saved my daughter by saving yourself, by choosing to be visible again even when it was terrifying, by walking across that ballroom and making yourself vulnerable in front of everyone who thought you were just a janitor, just a failure, just someone who should know his place. She looked at him with eyes that saw everything. That's what courage looks like, Ethan. Not fearlessness, just choosing to try even when you know you might fail. Choosing to reach out even when you know you might be rejected. Choosing to dance even when you've forgotten the steps. The music swelled. Ivy grabbed Ethan's hand, pulled him toward the dance floor. Come on, Mr. Ethan, you started this. You have to dance with me at least once. So he did. He danced with the girl he'd asked to dance a year ago, the girl who'd been trapped in silence, the girl who'd come back piece by piece by piece. And as they turned under the string lights, as Nova and Charlotte joined them, as the families from the foundation formed a circle of shared survival and hope, Ethan thought about Anna. He thought about the promise he'd made at her funeral, that he'd take care of Nova, that he'd keep going, that he wouldn't let grief swallow him whole. He thought about the 5 years he'd spent hiding, convinced that staying small was the same as staying safe. And he thought about the moment at the gala when he'd seen Ivy and made a choice, a reckless, impossible, beautiful choice to be visible again, to risk again, to remember that being alive meant being vulnerable, and being vulnerable meant being brave. Thank you, Ivy whispered her head against his shoulder as they swayed to music that was entirely wrong for slow dancing, but felt exactly right, for seeing me, for asking me to dance, for not giving up. Thank you, Ethan whispered back, for saying yes, for being brave enough to come back, for reminding me what it means to try. The song ended. Another began. The night stretched on full of music and laughter, and the particular magic that comes from choosing hope over despair, choosing connection over isolation, choosing to dance, especially when the world expects you to sit still and stay silent. And somewhere, in whatever place exists beyond grief and memory, and the walls we build against loss, Anna smiled, because her husband had finally learned the lesson she'd tried to teach him in their too short time together, that love wasn't about saving people, it was about seeing them, about showing up, about asking for a dance and meaning it, and sometimes that was enough to change everything.